Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, thank you everyone for coming tonight. The board met in an executive session for an informational session on the following dates: March 28th, immediately following the Buildings and Grounds and Finance Committee meeting for a session on budget process, and an executive session for 2 personnel matters and a student matter. On April 6th at 5 p.m. for a personal matter and an informational session on legal services. And tonight, I'm sorry. It says immediately prior. Prior to the meeting, I'm sorry. Tonight, prior to this meeting, for a student disciplinary matter, a personnel matter, and a legal matter. Moving on, can I have a motion to approve the agenda for this evening, the regular school board meeting, any incorporating additions and deletions?
Motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mauer.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Keener. All in favor? Motion carries 8-0. 7-0. Motion to approve the following minutes as presented.
Motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Mauer. All in favor? Motion carries 7-0. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bomerski. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening. It's great to see all of you. We are excited to be able to honor several of our students tonight. We're going to start off with our 2023 National Merit Scholarship Program. As you recall, back in the fall, we start notifying you as well as our students when they are identified as either commended or semifinalists, and they work through the entire process. Well, I'm extremely pleased to share with you that we have 3 National Merit Scholarship Program finalists here in our district. So I'm going to go over to the podium there. Mr. Bard, if you want to join me, we will honor and congratulate 3 of our students, and also Dr. Musser will grab some pictures. Right. All right. So our first 2023 National Merit finalist, and again, when we talked about this whole process, I mean, we're talking about a very small percentage of students across the entire country that actually make it into the finalist program. So we're extremely pleased and proud to present Daniel Huffnagel, Rihanna Romani, and Jenna Yeager. So if Daniel, Rihanna, and Jenna are here, come on up. All right, so Rihanna and Jenna are here. All right, so Rihanna, congratulations. Very proud of you. Congratulations. And
I'm gonna
Jenna.
do this picture thing. We do one at a time. We're all together.
Yeah, we'll do it right out here. Right, so. One more right here. Right.
If there's any parents that want a picture of not my thumb, come on up. I think we're good.
Any pictures, Barry? Okay. Very good. Perfect.
You like that, Jim?
That's good.
All right, congratulations. That is a tremendous accomplishment. When you look at kind of the statistics of actually being able to qualify as a finalist in the National Merit Program, it's truly commendable for both of you. And we'll make sure Daniel gets his certificate as well. Again, congratulations. All right. Also this evening, we have several musicians that we're going to be honoring. So I'm going to ask Mr. Saracini, high school band director, to come up and do some introductions. You can do them first. Perfect.
Good evening. We're actually going to have the performance first. So we have with us tonight the brass quintet from the high school symphonic band. So from left to right, as we look, we have sophomore Jack Kamens, sophomore and baseball player Nick Shilkoff, sophomore Tristan Newkirk, junior Adam Brandt, and junior Gabe Walters. You'll notice no seniors. The future is very bright in the brass quintet. So they're going to play a piece called Utopia. Awesome. Great job, guys. And that was actually a piece they played at our February chamber concert with symphonic band. All of the students played small groups like this in addition to the large group. And these guys were very excited to play this evening. So awesome job. Thanks, guys. I wanted to say a quick thank you to everybody and give a little background about the All-State students that we're recognizing tonight. The music department is honored to have so many dedicated, passionate, and outstanding musicians who choose to audition for the PMEA, or Pennsylvania Music Educator Association, honor ensembles and festivals. The road to Allstate actually begins in May of the previous year, when each of the 12 PMEA districts announces the audition materials in order to make districts. The students then spend months preparing, developing skills, and honing techniques in preparation for competitive auditions against peers from 8 counties. This past fall, the PMEA members of the high school music faculty nominated 47 HHS students to audition. Of those, 26 students were selected for PMEA district band, district jazz band, district choir, and district orchestra, including several students who were selected for multiple ensembles. At the district festivals, the students performed concerts and also re-auditioned for regions. Of the 26 students who made districts, 8 re-auditioned and were selected for regions. We actually hosted Region 5 band just a few weeks ago at the high school, and were treated to a truly professional performance performed by high school musicians. It was amazing. At regions, they followed the same audition process, and through highly competitive auditions, 4 high school students were selected for Allstate from Hempfield High School this year. The development of this level of musicianship is enhanced as the students move through all levels of the district, and our elementary and middle school music teachers provide really fundamental and foundational learnings that are necessary to scaffold to higher level musicianship like you hear this evening. The high school music faculty would like to acknowledge and thank our colleagues in kindergarten through 8th grade for everything that they do in this very important work of training the students. We'd also like to thank our building administration, the district office administration, and the school board for your support, your vision, your resources, and the opportunities and encouragements you provide for the students that allows them to flourish. We'd also like to thank the parents for all that you do, especially in the initial squeaks and squawks phases. You know, the first time the cello bow touches the cello, it's not always like perfect, you know? And also all of your transportation and support over the years. And finally, congratulations to the students on your accomplishments and best wishes on your future music endeavors. We very much appreciate your leadership in the programs here at Hempfield and look forward to your upcoming concerts, including the Allstate concert next week. Very exciting. So I'd like to take a second and recognize the Allstate musicians. We have 2 who are here this evening and 2 who are unable to make it. First, we have Jonah Gelpart. Jonah is a senior and trumpet player at the high school. He plays in the symphonic band and jazz band. This year, Jonah was selected for district band, district orchestra, and Allstate jazz band. He was also a member of the PMEA District 7 jazz band. Jonah is planning to go to Westchester University next year and will be playing in the jazz band there as well. So if we can give a round of applause for Jonah. Next, also unable to join us this evening due to a rehearsal for cello, is junior Maya Souter. Maya plays cello in the high school orchestra. And after last year, previously making Allstate Orchestra and placing first at the Allstate Orchestra re-audition as a sophomore, this year she was selected for district orchestra, region orchestra, and Allstate Orchestra again. In addition, Maya was also selected for and participated in all national orchestra this past November. We can give congratulations to Maya. Joining us this evening is James Yan. Come on up, James. James is a junior and a cellist in the high school orchestra, and this year was selected for district orchestra, region orchestra, and Allstate Orchestra. And in addition, because all of the students need to be incredibly talented at everything, James was also the pianist for district choir this year. James Yan. All right, and finally, we have Andre Hurst. Andre is a junior and plays clarinet in the high school symphonic band. Andre, you'll notice a little theme here. After previously making Allstate as a sophomore last year, placed first at Allstate Concert Band last year as a sophomore. And this year was selected for, it's a long list, district band, district orchestra, region band, region orchestra, and finally leading his to selection in Allstate Orchestra. In addition, Andre leaves in 2 days to represent Hempfield and the state of Pennsylvania at the National Association for Music Educators All East Conference in Rochester, New York. Andre Hurst.
Come on up. Just share it with me.
Thank you, Mr. Saraceni. Thank you to all of our students, those performing tonight, as well as those we get to honor for all your continuous time and dedication of what you put in, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom and performances and our extracurriculars. Congratulations to all of you. Right, and for those who are interested, there are many concerts coming up in the last kind of month of school, as well as all of our spring sports and extracurricular. I know we have a baseball player here. We have a great baseball team this year, as well as all the band and orchestra concerts, choral concerts. So I encourage you to come out and support our students in every which way you can. And that we'll turn over to student council next from student recognition. So
Alrighty. Good evening, everyone. Student council, although we are winding down the year, we are finishing strong here. We've been working hard on our constitution to prepare it for next year, updating terminology with all the new flex/win updates, changing attendance and officer policies and other minor things to better represent our student council as a whole for next year.
This Friday, the high school will be running on an early dismissal schedule in preparation for the Spring Shebang Pep Rally for Mini-Thon later that night. Student council has brought over 40 containers of Italian ice so every student in attendance can have some on the 87-degree day.
Next week, we will be meeting with Mr. Bermirsky to discuss district and student school updates and student concerns. This will be the last superintendent meeting of the year. And that would be all tonight for the upcoming month. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, guys. Okay, moving on to the residents' report. The board provides a time of public comment for residents and taxpayers to bring their thoughts to the board, but it's not a time for exchange between the board, administration, and the speaker. We ask that the speakers refrain from identifying specific students, staff, or community members by name. Residents and taxpayers who are interested in making public comments must complete electronic registration prior to 3 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Mr. Graham will be introducing the first speaker and then also the on deck speaker. And I will turn it over to Mr. Graham.
Our first speaker this evening, it will be Amanda Thomas, who will be followed by Wendy Valupas.
Good evening. In consideration of children, I want to warn parents that may want to remove minors from the meeting within approximately the next minute due to upcoming topics of my speech. I want to thank you for your time reevaluating policy regarding material in Hempfield. However, I'm frustrated that it takes this much time and effort to keep our students reading age-appropriate content in school. I brought this concern to light in fall of 2021. I went through all the proper channels within the current policy 109. My formal response from the district was the material will remain in place. After wasting months of my time and my daughter enduring a very dark year at CMS due to this material, some unsupportive teachers and administration, and her feeling of insecurity in the bathrooms and hallways, we pulled her from the district and enrolled her in private school. She is thriving. That being said, I pay taxes to Hempfield. My son is still at CES. And not everyone is as blessed as we are to have family members help support the financial strain that is private school tuition. We took it upon ourselves to fix the situation when Hempfield let us down. But now I'm seeing how just one student in the district can matter. The entire locker room was shut down at LMS to support concerns of one student. and I'm glad the district is taking that seriously. Each student should feel comfortable. But what about when my student felt uncomfortable? I can't reconcile why this policy revision is taking so much time. When my daughter's 7th grade class had to watch a video of a large cartoon bear humping a small bear, it was brought to the attention of one board member and the video was removed within hours. I don't really care what category the material falls into. If it is inappropriate, it should be removed. Actually, it shouldn't be allowed in the first place. One board member stated at 316's meeting that it is illegal to ban such material in our libraries. On the contrary, it's actually illegal to allow obscene material according to the federal obscenity law. Per the DOJ website, obscenity is not protected under First Amendment rights to free speech, and violations of federal obscenity laws are criminal offenses. Federal law strictly prohibits the distribution of obscene matter to minors. This law defines a minor as anyone under the age of 16. It also tells me that not only is it not illegal to be removing some of these books from the library, but rather it's illegal not to. It doesn't matter whether the obscenity is a snippet or the entire book. At the end of the day, my moral compass tells me that these books shouldn't be in Hempfield. I pray that the majority of the board agrees. In addition, I want to talk about the impending vote on elementary ELA curriculum. One of my concerns with the material my daughter saw last year in middle school was, when will I find inappropriate text in the elementary school? The answer is next year, if you go with Wit and Wisdom. Per the parent tip sheets I was given from the principal at the elementary school, Walk to Moons listed in module 4 for 4th grade. My mother screamed just once, one long mournful wail, and then it was quiet. When the doctor carried the baby out of the room, I asked to see it. It had a pale bluish tinge and there were marks on its neck where the umbilical cord had strangled it. It might have been dead for hours, the doctor told my father. I asked if I could touch her. She was still warm from being inside my mother. When he turned on the light, I saw the blood spread out all across the bed. It had soaked the sheets and the blanket. It had soaked into the white plaster of my cast. She wouldn't stop bleeding. Later, my mother said they took out all my equipment. She would not have any more babies. Please consider that in Hempfield, we don't even teach puberty until 5th grade. However, with this book, we would have 4th graders reading the details of a stillbirth of a sibling. This is just one example from Wit and Wisdom. The book is good. It even won the Newbery Medal, but it is not for 9 and 10-year-olds. A board member stated on 316 that some students commented that this curriculum was rigorous. Maybe that's because the content is too much to ask them to handle. There are other Wit and Wisdom books I could quote if I had more than 5 minutes. I'll just say that topics include suicide, children being shot, rape, and cannibalism, some with images. Parents shouldn't have to read 73 pages of tip sheets plus every book to determine what's not appropriate. Lastly, I hope that you ask to see national data. You're so concerned about scores on standardized tests. Please show me why Wit and Wisdom is so much better than the current curriculum. And remember, it doesn't even have a phonics component. I've heard why a select few like it better, but where's the proof that it works better? I haven't found it. All I found was controversy over content and schools pulling it for that reason. Why budget over $1.5 million if there's no supportive data? Do we really need another thing to cause controversy for the school district? I ask you
ma'am. Thank you.
again to look towards your moral compass. Do not
Wendy
put
Valukas
Wit and Wisdom into Hempfield.
is our next speaker.
These are our youngest kids. Let them be kids. Thank you.
Wendy Valukas will be followed by Aaron Small.
I'd like to apologize for not stopping that. Remember, when the time is up, we have to have you conclude.
Do you still have your flashcard?
I've got 2.
Okay, good. All right, well, good evening, everybody. And I'm here to talk about the locker rooms and the bathrooms. I think it's absolutely critical for our youth to have the privacy that they deserve. That is, biological males that want to be in the male bathroom should be in there, and same with females. And it was really sad for me to see that an entire locker room was shut down. I understand it's a tough issue and that you're pondering it. I guess I would just hope that there would be, some temporary action you could take, like designating one bathroom for that individual, as opposed to shutting down an entire locker room. It's just not good use of a big asset that, we pay for with taxpayer money. So that would be my suggestion is there other creative things that we could be thinking about? Maybe that student gets to have extra time, maybe, after everybody's else, allocate different time allocations, since you're talking about one student, if there's not a bathroom that you could repurpose for that, but it just seems like really a shame that you've got a whole locker room that's not being used for one person. But I do agree that that person needs to be accommodated. So it's just a matter of, I know you're working through it. I know you're going to vote on something soon, but I would just hope that there's a way to accommodate without spending a lot of money on it. And the other thing I wanted to share with you is there's an excellent book that I think everybody in the school district should read, especially your guidance counselors. And it's by Abigail Schreier. And it's called Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. And it's a book that goes into gender ideology. And there's 3 particular areas. One is young kids. One is what they call a social contagion. And one is activists. In the case of the young kids, it's usually between the ages of 2 and 4. It makes up 0.01% of the population. It generally is male, and 1 in 10,000 males have this situation. 70% of them outgrow it. 30% of them are then either become trans or mostly gay, but some trans. In the case of the second category, which is what I found most interesting, it's a social contagion, and it mostly impacts girls. So for parents of girls, just be aware, you might want to get this book. It used to be that girls would, they're going through a time where they don't know themselves and they're very upset with who they are. They don't like their bodies or whatever. Used to be anorexic and bulimic was what we saw in cutting. And now it seems to be that there's a lot of influence, a lot of social media that's convincing them that maybe they should be a different sex. The problem with it is that it's irreversible. When those kids are influenced, and I'm asking that our school district would turn those kids back to the parents and not do as some school districts are doing and actually try to counsel these kids, because it is irreversible. When they start taking the puberty blockers, by the way, Lupron was never FDA approved. I found that very interesting. The next step then is they go to cross-sex hormones and they start taking testosterone. And some Planned Parenthoods are handing it out like candy without any parental guidance. What it does is it renders them infertile. And there was just the first case in the UK where a girl actually sued and won because her life has changed forever. So I'm highly recommending that our school, the folks that matter would get, it's on Amazon. Again, it's called Irreversible Damage, and the author is Abigail Schreier. It's a fact-based book that talks about statistics in a way that I hadn't seen before. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Aaron Small will be followed by Carly Smith.
Good evening. I'm here tonight to offer some feedback on the adoption of the elementary English language arts curriculum. Though I do have experience working for the district as a substitute teacher, I'm speaking tonight in an individual capacity. My thoughts are my own. I listened to the recent Education Committee meeting where the update on the pilot programs was presented to the board. For the last year, I have been following along with the process of choosing and implementing pilot programs for language arts at the elementary level. I was disappointed to hear skepticism about the value of adopting either of these pilots at recent meetings, especially since all 9 administrators surveyed stated that they were in favor of one or the other pilot programs. 8 of the 9 preferred Wit and Wisdom. None surveyed wanted to continue with current programming. Administrators have reported positive impacts from the pilot programs, especially the quality of the writing that has been generated and the excitement from teachers and students. At that recent meeting, several board members expressed the desire to hear from more parents about their opinions on the pilots. I'm here as a parent of an elementary child who was not able to benefit from the pilot experience this year. I've had 2 children go through the elementary programs here at Hempfield. My oldest child finished elementary school in a different district. I can attest the programming that is being provided in our elementary classrooms is inconsistent from grade level to grade level, and often from classroom to classroom within one grade level. I'm not here to criticize current programming. I simply want to acknowledge that the time for an update is past due. The last time that elementary ELA curriculum language was reviewed was 2016. At that time, the revision was largely of the same program being used previously for an undetermined number of years. It's unclear to me if new teachers are being adequately trained in this model or provided with adequate resources to build classroom libraries and class sets that are necessary to make that model work. It is my observation that currently many teachers are using a hybrid model of instruction that mixes reading, writing workshop with more direct instruction, often with materials they find online or create on their own, often at their own expense. It requires an intense amount of planning and time on the part of our teachers to create lessons and resources. There's also no guarantee that what is being created currently is actually aligned with PA standards or updated research. It creates a situation where there is often repetition across grade levels, as there is no core list of texts or activities specific to each grade level. A true reading writing workshop requires a massive amount of organization, tracking, and time spent teaching students procedures. It's difficult to maintain in a vertical manner from grade level to grade level, as students may reread the same books over and over if they are not provided with clear grade level appropriate choices. Currently, we do not expect our teachers to write their own math lessons or come up with their own problem sets. In fact, we spent a comparable amount of money in last year's budget to adopt new math curriculum, as is proposed this year for the new ALA curriculum. As a substitute under the current program, it is very difficult to walk into a classroom and pick up where the teacher left off the day before, because the materials that students are reading may all be different. When I substitute, I usually get left with a lesson that includes reading from a Scholastic Reader or having students complete ExactPath or some other skill building program. With one of these pilots, a sub would be able to step in and follow the next planned lesson, much the way we do with a math lesson. In addition, taking on a long-term substitute job might be much more appealing if prospective subs knew that they would not have to create all their own content. I want teachers to be able to focus on how they teach their English language arts content, not what they teach. This would free our teachers to more effectively differentiate instruction, as well as to address many other elements of classroom management they simply do not have time to do currently. Our teachers can adjust instruction to the needs of our learners. We do not have to expect them to use every piece of adopted textbook. However, they can more effectively adapt those needs if they are provided with the resources to do so. Many of the comments presented from surveys administrators, teachers, parents, and students referred to increased rigor in these pilots. Isn't that the kind of opportunity we want to be offering our students? I only wish that one of my own children had been able to benefit from this kind of increased expectations for learning. Another point raised recently by a board member was concern over teachers and staff leaving mid-year or resigning in general. If we are serious about retaining quality educators, we need to be providing them with true supports and resources. I've heard from more than one source how very needed this new curriculum is at the elementary level. If we fail to adopt one of these pilots, the time and effort that many put into evaluating will be wasted.
I'm sorry, ma'am, your time is up. Thank you.
Carly Smith. Carly Smith will be followed by Stacy Gregory.
So I have an infographic for you that I'd like to share. And I'm going to try to do this fairly quickly, right? So I've got 5 minutes to cover some extremely technical data, and it's really challenging to do. So really my main point is I've been asking this for quite some time. My main ask is I would really like to meet with the board in an executive session and provide some extended detail or extended information on the data in which you're receiving for our test results on EMF radiation. In the Buildings and Grounds Committee meeting 2 weeks ago, there was some information that was shared back and forth, and some of that data was 100% inaccurate. And I want to make sure that we are very, very clear in what that is. So you can see in the infographic, what you're looking at is the test data history, and the test data history for both LMS and RES trends significantly upward. Do you see that? Does everybody see that? I realize that we're not going to get dialogue here, but this is a really important concept to understand. We are not sitting in a place where we have no change. From 2017, the inception and baseline testing through this year, we have seen exponential increase, and you can see it in the graph. There's some other poignant points to this, and I'd like to kind of talk about just very briefly what the factors are that can impact that data, and then the relevance of that data. So when we take a look at this, it's really important to understand that there are both outside and inside factors that bring us to the results that we have here. When testing is done on site in any of these locations, it's extremely important that there are people in the buildings, that it is a normal business day, and that we are testing with students and staff in the buildings. This last testing series was completed without any students in the building and very little staff, none at RES, some at LMS. And that's because it was a teacher in service day. It was the first in service day through the years of the testing that we had done. And you can see again by that graph, I know that I'm making Stacy pick these up and down, but if you take a look at that graph just one more time, it's going to show you the results for 2022 all the way through. They've been increasing. In 2023, we have an anomaly, and that anomaly is that LMS went down and RES went up, even with nobody in the building. How did that happen? Well, it's called co-location. We have more antenna, and we have more arrays, and we have more service at RES. Why is this all important? Because there was a request to remove the testing parameters, and it's really important that we continue to follow through with the testing measurements so that we can adequately look at the baseline, look at where we're going, and then make recommendations based on that. Those recommendations don't need to change year to year, but you do have to have an effective protocol on how to handle those assets and protect our assets. So I'd also like to mention some of those things that are impactful and how does that happen, right? Weather is something that can impact the temperature, the general conditions, the height and distance of the cellular base structures and where those arrays are, the numbers of antenna, the power density of those antenna, the types of transmitters, whether they are cellular, radio, what type of communication they are. And then again, if there's TV broadcast or radio that has been co-located on those towers as well. So I just want it to be known that since 2019, there has been an addition to RES, and there have been multiple arrays. It is false to believe that those companies would tell us. They will not. This is also another benefit of the district doing this testing, because we will know based on that increase, if there is an increase in the history. It's also really important that when we're going through this testing, that we are using equipment that is definitively calibrated, that we are looking at apples to apples, and that we're utilizing the same kind of testing protocol and technique that we've done over the years. And that is totally possible. There is an industrial hygienist on the planet that would do it otherwise. So please, please, please do not vote or make any decisions to reduce this testing, because there's also some things that Stacy will cover. On top of that, I really am requesting the opportunity for you all to ask questions on how this works and how does it impact us and what does this data look like as a whole. Thank you.
Stacy Gregory will be followed by Judy Brady.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening, and thank you all for your service for the district. I just want to touch on a couple of points that Carly also addressed. After listening to the committee's discussion of the most recent Building and Grounds meeting, I have concerns that the board will vote to stop the annual RF-EMF testing at LMS in Rohrstown. Hopefully, some of you have had a chance since that meeting to review the agreement related to that testing and realize that there is an obligation to continue that testing on an annual basis and at the expense of Verizon, which should make you all happy. As an organization, Hempfield Citizens for Safe Schools is obliged to send the requests for testing to Verizon, and we will certainly do so going forward. But ideally, we'd like to work in cooperation with the board and with the district so we can make sure that it happens the right way each year, and so that we can make sure that an independent party is responsible for the testing, which to date has not happened. The members of HCSS would also like to ensure that the results of the annual testing are accurately reported to the board. And that's really the primary focus of why I'm here tonight. After listening to the presentation of the test results at the Building and Grounds meeting by Ms. James, I must respectfully ask what her qualifications are in the area of RF-EMF testing. This is an extremely specialized area, which requires a high level of expertise in order for it to be properly interpreted. Ms. James was asked several questions by the board members that only a qualified expert could answer. We understand she was doing the best she could with the information that she had. She was sort of the intermediary between the tester and the board. But unfortunately, most of the information that she provided was inaccurate. Carly addressed a couple of those. I'll just say one more. One of the examples was she talked about and the members of the board talked about 100% being the acceptable level of exposure to radiation. Well, you could literally be standing at the top of a cell tower that is turned on and not be exposed to 100%. So I think we all know that that's not a great idea. And that so to say that 100% is the acceptable level and that everything less than that is okay is just blatantly untrue. What I'd like to propose to you all tonight is the opportunity for a conversation with someone who's in fact an expert in the area, who can answer your questions with accurate information. You're all very familiar with Carly Smith. She's a certified environmental safety and compliance officer. She's a BS in occupational safety and industrial hygiene management. Carly has worked to advance safety measures related to RF EMF exposure from technology for the last 25 years. The format we have here, where members of the community get to talk at you for a limited amount of time, is great to raise your awareness, but it is completely ineffective to allow you to ask the questions that you need answers to. This is an issue that's complicated. You need to be able to sit down with an expert and have your questions answered in real time. You deserve to have accurate information so you can make the best decisions for all of the people you represent. And we all have the same goal here. It's protecting our students and giving them the best education we can. The technology is an enormous part of their education. Carly's offering you expert services on how to implement technology in the safest way possible, and she's offering it for free. I think there's no logical reason why this board would not take her up on that offer. She's a member of this community. She's a parent. She's a professional. She wants nothing more than to educate the public about safe technology. And I want nothing more than for you to be educated about safe technology. I'm also a parent, a member of this community, and a professional. And I'm very concerned about the safety of my kids and their radiation exposure. We have a free resource in Carly. I say we use it. Thank you.
Judy Brady will be our final speaker this evening.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board tonight. I was in attendance at the March 28th committee meeting, and I was stunned at the rapidity with which this board fundamentally altered the work of the faculty and administration who spent months preparing the district's career readiness plan to submit to the state. Your role was to either approve it or reject it, not to make edits so dramatic that the meaning and the purpose were changed. Mr. Wolgemuth opined that equity can mean a lot of different things and should therefore be removed from the document. You quibbled over any reference to equity and inclusion. Had you taken the time to access the Pennsylvania Department of Education's Equity Pillars of Practice, you would have found it clearly defined the purpose of education as, I quote,
In Pennsylvania, equity has been defined as every student having access to the educational resources and rigor that they need at the right moment in their education across race, gender, ethnicity, language, disability, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, family background, and or family income, end quote. As Mr. Musser pointed out that night, equity and equality are two very different.
Mr. Brady, please refrain from mentioning specific people's names, if you could. Thank you.
They cannot be interchanged without altering meaning. Equity means that our students need varying supports to attain the same hoped for outcomes. As a school system, we want and expect them all to get to the same finish line. However, many students will need a boost just to get to the starting line. Many may need a boost all the way through. By offering classroom support like enhanced reading or math instruction, special education services, a wheelchair ramp, and a wide doorway to get into the building, free breakfast and lunch to have a belly and a brain nourished for learning, or extra listening ear for counsel. That is equity, giving what is needed to even out the bumps in the road so that everyone can succeed along their journey through school. But this board, with the exception of one member, was perfectly satisfied to intentionally shortchange our students. You were quite deliberate in removing equity and replacing it with a very different term, equality. Equal means everyone has the same size slice of the pie, even if we're all not that hungry. Equal means everyone gets the same size stool to see over the fence, even though some are very tall and don't need it, and others are very short and actually could use a ladder. Equal means you get what you get, and too bad if that's not enough. But equity is not a pie to be sliced up. It doesn't mean taking anything away from you that you need. There's enough to go around for everyone. Equity means you get the serving size you need when you need it to succeed. And I get what I need when I need it to succeed. And we both reach the finish line and nobody has to lose. Equal, on the other hand, means everyone gets the same amount, which might be too much for one person and not enough for another. That one person can succeed and the other one fails. That is not fair. It's wasteful of resources when they are spent where they are not needed, when they could be utilized to a better end somewhere else. By removing the term equity and being satisfied to replace it with equality, you also showed the taxpayers of this district that you are fine if some of our students do not succeed. This board was also happy to quickly strike an entire paragraph from the same career readiness document because it addressed inclusion. I ask you why that word is so frightening to you, but I believe actions in deleting it speak volumes. To be focused on removing all reference to inclusion can only mean that you do not want some people to be included. You do not want their story to be told. You do not want them as part of Hempfield. The leadership of this district must assure that moving forward, a lens of equity and inclusion informs all decision-making, all programs, policies, and procedures, not only because it is directed by the State Department of Education, but because it's the right thing to do. I ask that the board revisit the document, amend it to its original wording with references to both equity and inclusion back in place. Show our students that each and every one of them matters, that their health and happiness matter, that their identity and individuality matter, and that their academic success matters. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Burmiski for the superintendent's report.
Right, thank you again and good evening. Tonight we have two presentations and discussions for you. We're going to begin with the ELA pilot update. Dr. Dandridge, Mr. Hoffman, myself, Ms. Rainier is here, as well as some of our staff members who are pilot teachers. And then after that presentation and any questions and discussion, I'll move into the 23-24 budget update. Dr. Dandridge.
Mr. Hoffman's coming forward. As you know, we've been working on the ELA pilot now for approximately 18 months. We've had no fewer than 6 presentations to the school board. We're prepared this evening to make a final recommendation to review all the results of those previous presentations
add on the financial components, and then talk about our recommendation to the board. Our hope is that we would be looking at a vote at the April 25th finance meeting for a final adoption. So.
All right, so just to review a little bit of the rationale we shared at the last meeting, as it was mentioned tonight, we currently use a reading workshop model at the elementary level. So they're not consistent materials or resources that are used across the district in a single grade or across grades. Teachers have expressed a dire need for an ELA program. They want their focus to be on instruction, not to finding materials. So we really want them to be focused on the how and not the what. We do want to build in that consistency across grade levels, both within a building and across the district, so we can continue to move our students forward each and every year. And what it also does is it allows us to integrate Pennsylvania's structured literacy initiative, as well as the science of reading initiative. As I shared last month, writing is a specific area of need for us as a district. Our PSSA data, the TDAs, the text dependent analysis, our scores last year for grades 4, 5, and 6, average score was 7.86 out of 16 points. Those TDAs are scored on a 1, 2, 3, or 4-point scale. So that means our students' average score is a little less than a 2. And that TDA comprises 25% of their overall score on the ELA PSSA. So improving that writing is an extremely important feature for us for our PSSA results. And just a reminder that Savas and Wit and Wisdom were chosen by our district teachers from lists of highly rated programs from Ed Reports. So that's how we came to the 2 programs that we are currently using. Dr. Dandridge said we've been at this for about 18 months. This slide has links to the presentations that we've given throughout that time. Just a couple things. We have covered throughout those some of the community concerns that have been raised about some of the text. We know that with both of the programs, there are far more materials than what we will ever be able to use in a year. I'm speaking to other districts that use both of these programs. They cover about 3/4 of the content. And so we have flexibility as we develop our curriculum around these programs to replace text, modify our instruction based upon needs in the Hempfield School District.
Mr. Hoffman, I'm sorry, my mic's falling apart. You mentioned the text and we had several, we had one specifically mentioned tonight. And I'm sorry, I don't have the chart where you X'd out with me. Forgot my phone of all things. Could you elaborate a little bit? Not a full presentation, but I know in grade 2, there was one unit specifically that was altered. And then the other book that was mentioned was 4th grade. So could you generally, or whatever you think would work, or help us out here in understanding how those modifications have been made?
Right. In Wit and Wisdom, there are 4 modules per grade level. Realistically, we would be able to teach about 3 of those. So we would be able to look at which unit in each grade level could be eliminated. With Savas, there are 5 units in each grade level, and we would be able to realistically teach about 4 of those. So again, being able to streamline based upon the writing, types of writing that's involved in each unit, the text that are being read, to make sure that we cover all of the standards, but also addressing any community concerns that we have. We have not had any parent concerns from any of the texts that we have read from either program during the pilot.
Well, we had a concern expressed. I know we had a meeting and got through part of the concerns that had been expressed previously. For example, what did you do with that grade 2 unit? The civil rights unit.
Right. So there was one book in that unit that we decided not to use as a part of the instruction that was being given. The 4th grade book that was mentioned tonight is part of the 4th module, which is not a module that we will end up teaching.
Thank you.
So we reviewed data at the last meeting. And Cadence and ExactPath data did not favor one program or another. We said, that change requires time. So looking at changes after 3 or 4 months, we were not necessarily going to see huge differences there. But current curriculum, Savas, Wit and Wisdom all showed positive growth. The data from parent surveys, student surveys was slightly in favor of Wit and Wisdom. Data from teachers slightly in favor of Wit and Wisdom. We had 3 grade levels select Wit and Wisdom. 3 did not come to consensus. 1 chose Savas, but also mentioned that they like both and both would be an improvement over what we currently have. And data from administrators was in favor of Wit and Wisdom. On the next slide, you'll see that breakdown by grade level. So it was kindergarten, 3rd and 5th who selected Wit and Wisdom, 6th grade selected Savas, also saying either would be fine. And then grades 1, 2, and 4. Essentially what happened there was that the teachers selected the program they were piloting, which makes sense. That's the one that they knew best. It would probably have been ideal to have had teachers switch mid-year so they could experience both programs. I would tell you that the teachers sitting here tonight would tell you, one of them shaking their head no right now, that is not a possibility. The programs are both very good, but are very different. And so to have kids switch mid-year is not fair to them, not fair to teachers either. So having that switch occurred would just not be possible. So that was a consideration that we thought of and quickly rejected because it just was not going to be workable. The next slide shows some of the transparency and consistency that we've been able to put forward this year. These are links to the parent tip sheets from Wit and Wisdom. Savas also has a parent and family sheet for each unit. These provide parents, family members with the questions that will be answered during the unit, the books that will be read, and then provides them with other activities they can do at home. Mr. Graham, if you would, is that active that you can click on one of those? You want to do 3rd grade, that's kind of middle of the road there. So these tip sheets allow for parents to see what's happening in classrooms, but they also allow for our support teachers within the district to know as well. So our learning support teachers who are seeing students during intervention time, reading specialists, our ELD teachers, these also provide them with the content that's being taught, with the books that are being read. And so it allows them to do some pre-teaching of skills, which allow kids to come to their general classroom instruction 1 step ahead and able to participate and be on board with what is being learned. You can see these tip sheets have the books that are being read, any kind of poetry, which would be linked online. And this one has a specific story, which is a text from an Aesop fable. There might also be informational articles that would be linked online for students to be reading. It also mentions the pieces of artwork that students will be analyzing. If there is music in a unit that students are listening to and analyzing, that's here as well. And then any videos that the students will be watching throughout the unit. It lists the essential questions from the unit, gives questions that parents can ask at home. And then this was actually a comment that came up in the parent surveys. Something that parents liked were the list of books to read at home. Several parents mentioned taking this list along to the library with them so that their kids could check out these books. And so that really told us that kids were interested and motivated by the topics and wanting to read more about them. The other piece that we found was interesting is there's a place on each one of these that has an extension that you can do. So this one has places to visit that deal with the sea. In 3rd grade, their 2nd unit deals with space. And actually one of the teachers related a story of one of her students who for her birthday was able to choose where she wanted to go for a weekend getaway. She chose the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. because of this unit. And then the other thing that we were able to do with this unit, since they're currently studying it, several weeks ago, if you remember, right after sunset, the planets were all aligned and you could see them without the aid of a telescope. So the 2 3rd grade teachers and I were able to send that information home to parents so they could follow through and be viewing things that they were studying in school at home in the evening as well. So these tip sheets proved very helpful, not only to parents, but also to other support teachers in our classrooms as well.
Mr. Hoffman, I have another question. This was brought up tonight, and I know we've discussed it frequently, the resource list. when I saw that, I assumed initially that those books would be provided in the library and some in the classrooms. For children to be able to check out and take home. Also, it's great to go to the public library. That's a great resource for us. So when we look at the financials, does that include some of these purchases of for these resource books that are supplemental to the basic core books that are being taught in the class?
It does not. The books that are being purchased are the books that are listed here as picture books informational and picture books literary. So on the side table there are stacks of the books by grade level. Those are the books that would be purchased. Mr. Graham, if you scroll further down the list of other books to read, those are not books that we would be purchasing. Many of them are in our school libraries. They're readily available at public libraries. But they are not ones that are being purchased with the program.
So will you or someone from your staff be recommending that the library purchase all these for our libraries? Or I know we have many elementary schools, and forgive me, I don't remember exactly how many right now. So that we have a full complement of this in our library to be used, or?
So if Wit and Wisdom is a program that we adopt, yes, this is something that Mrs. DeMaria and I would look at and make sure that our libraries have these titles in them so that they'd be available both for teachers to check out as well as students to check out as well.
Okay, and does Savas have something like this also?
Yes.
Okay, and that the same would apply to that.
Right. So Savas is a little bit different. What happens with Savas is they're reading portions of books. And so one of the pieces of feedback we heard was the students wanted to read the whole thing. Some of those books are available in our libraries, some are not. So if Savas is the program we would go with, we would look to make sure that we have the full text of the stories that are actual full stories.
Thank you.
Mr. Hoffman, I want to jump back to your data summary. And I can make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself here. And then your March 2023 presentation, if you could click through to that, please, and go to slide 6. The message has shifted a little bit from slide 6 on the March 2023 program to what's up here today. Because I thought it was interesting during the March presentation that, and I complimented the administration on being very transparent, that neither program, neither Savas nor Wit and Wisdom, showed any measurable difference from the current curriculum. And I asked the question then, and I will ask it again tonight, why we are spending $1.5 million on something that appears not to work. So if you click on March 2023, I want everyone to make sure we're remembering what we're doing. It's just like a hyperlink or something. And then go to slide 6, and the data is right there that it doesn't, neither program actually does anything when measured against right there. No, the next one, right there. And we talked about that at some length in March. It looked like we're backing away from that a little bit in tonight's presentation. But to me, this is a critical question: is both programs may be fine, right? They might not hurt anything, but they don't appear to do anything either. And to me, spending $1.5 million on something that doesn't do anything is a concern.
So one of the things I had mentioned earlier this evening, it's going to take us longer than 3 or 4 months with a new program to see any results. You'll see later in the presentation, we have goals for 5 years with a new program, what we would hope to see at the end of 5 years. Many of the things that we've seen have been more qualitative. We've seen great improvements with writing, which neither of these assessments, Acadience or Exact Path, address. We've seen lots of increased student engagement, lots of excitement about reading. So yes, we did not see quantitatively from either Exact Path or Acadience really any difference between current program, Savas, or Wit and Wisdom. It was all over the place. I'm sorry.
Or the benchmark that is the current curriculum.
Correct. That's what I
Yeah.
said. Yeah, the current curriculum, Savas or Wit and Wisdom did not show that one program was performing better than the other in Acadian or Exact Path. Certain grade levels, one was higher, certain grade levels, another was higher. So there was no consistency shown with that. You're correct.
Thank you.
Just remind me, is there data available from those that have been using these programs for a period of time that would show a change rather than the consistency and no change that Mr. Keener referenced?
Yeah, there is, if you talk to districts that have been using these programs for multiple years, and that's how they receive the high ratings that they do.
And it's not that there's no change. In fact, the slide 7 and 8 in that same presentation shows you each of the data points. There was growth shown in our current curriculum. There was growth shown in the Savas classrooms. There was growth shown in the Wit and Wisdom classrooms. There was no one that showed consistently higher growth in all categories and all grade levels.
Right, and that's a good point, except that the fact that the growth was consistent, we have growth, that's a great thing, okay? I'm trying to figure out what the growth comes from. I think the growth is coming from the fact that we're back, our faculty is working with the students, they're imparting their passion for teaching, their educational expertise, and that's where we're seeing the growth from, not by one program or another. And I think the data bears that out, that the control group, the group that was sticking with the current curriculum, saw the same amount of improvement overall as either of the pilot programs did.
Yeah, I think the sample size too small to show overall conclusions. Certainly, everyone can have opinions looking at that data about what they see in it. I would not draw any statistically conclusive conclusions based on the 3 months of data that we collected. But I am encouraged by the fact that all of the programs are showing growth with our students. And I do agree that's a.
Andrew, do you have we both have pretty strong grounding in statistics, and I respect that. On the other hand, the administration recommended to us when they launched the pilot program that, oh, we're going to show you these benchmarks and that will show you how well the programs work.
Sure.
So.
Yep. Understood.
Okay.
All right, so
But I'm not exactly how to counter this. I'm looking at this as an educator. I taught mostly high school, but I did homeschool my younger girls for several years when we lived overseas. One of the things that I think, well, there's a couple of things that I think about these curriculums. It's not that they're new and fresh. That's not it. They're showing new methodology, if I'm using even the right term, new methods of teaching, new approaches to teaching. And what we heard from the teachers was our kids are excited. We're getting anecdotal feedback from our parents that they like what's going on. They're excited about writing. You know, if you as a teacher can do anything that makes you better in the classroom, then your students are going to do better at all levels. And you have said you don't have enough data yet. We do have data of a whole bunch of teachers sitting in front of us and saying, we like this. We like that it frees our time up because it's such a well-planned curriculum. We can just dive right in and teach. We heard lesson plans are set for us. We have great resources in some cases, maybe too many resources. So I'm like, this curriculum, I think we have a policy review every 6 years. Is that correct?
correct.
We will have had this current curriculum 7 years. The money's allotted. I think it will be money well spent. So that's just my counterpoint. And I'm not saying I don't care about data, because I do care about data. I don't think there's enough difference in it to say, let's don't get this, because I'm excited about these programs. I know which one I like the best, but I think both are quality programs that will continue to bring quality curriculum that our teachers can use to their best of their ability to keep the high level that we're looking for our Hempfield students. And I'm not going to say dollars don't matter because we all know they do. And there have been times when I've said, why are we spending X, Y, Z? Doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm saying in this case, it makes perfect sense to me. And I look forward when you get to the actual breakdown of the dollars too. So.
Yeah, and the consistency is the other piece that that this will bring. All right, so the dollars are next.
Well, before you get to the dollars, can I just back up just 1 second? I want to state the obvious that I agree that there needs to be some consistency grade level to grade level, and the redundancy is not helpful with education, and it's confusing and it puts a lot of pressure on the teachers. So I can definitely agree to that. I want to go back to your slide number 6 under the first group, and then you had a link to the pilot summary. And really the question I'm asking is, you show a slight difference between the programs in slide, I believe 3. But if you go down to slide 6, you'll see on there, and then you toggle back to the ELA pilot summary with the number of students in the classrooms. I guess I'm wondering how you got to that slight difference, because when I look at the correlation between the number of students, for example, that are in each one, there's a direct somewhat correlation for the most part to the number of to the slight difference potentially of the ones that prefer wit and wisdom versus Savas, if I said all those things correctly. So take a look at that. So K, 3, and 5. And then if you toggle back to that link, you'll see that those are the class sizes that for the most part, other than grade 5, had much higher student counts in there. So how did you get to that slight difference? Like, tell me how that slide, I think it's number 3, came about. Not 3, I'm sorry. It's let me get the right slide.
I think you're talking
Slide
about
5.
the sample sizes of students. So we tried to show it on that chart. We didn't have number of students on that chart, but we had number of classrooms. It's not a perfect comparison.
Yeah, it's vastly different because you had larger number of students in some of these, and it clearly looks like it impacted the decision of one over the other one.
Mhm.
And that's the part I'm questioning.
Yeah.
How did that influence it? Are we comparing apples to apples, or is this slight change really not a true slight change? It's based on numbers.
So the chart that was in tonight's presentation, that's just showing how many teachers were in that grade level.
I'm looking at the number of students section down at the bottom. So for example, there was a lot more students in the kindergarten class that were exposed to the Savas program versus the wit and wisdom. How did you ascertain that slight difference for students that translated to the current slide?
So what they had to do on the in-service day, their task was to get together and as a group, the group that taught the Savas curriculum, the group that taught the wit and wisdom program, were to come together, discuss the pros and cons, and come to a consensus as to which program they favored. That was their task on the in-service day. The kindergarten numbers, taking you back to the March presentation, one of the reasons for a smaller number of students, even though we had an equal number of pilots, is the fact that 2 of the classrooms in wit and wisdom were piloted in our EDK classrooms that have smaller sizes. So they had less students in that pilot, even though there was 3 classrooms for each in there. But that's how we came to the consensus on the table where we were referencing which program was chosen. If that helps.
Yeah, I think a little bit. It just, I know there's no perfect science when you look at this. However, it looks like the numbers and the information could potentially be a little skewed. And that slight difference to me looks like, all honesty, they look almost equal at the end of the day when I look at the data that was presented.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I think, and Mr. Hoffman already said this evening, but we heard consistently from all the grade levels and all the programs is they preferred the curriculums and the programs that they were using over what we currently had, loud and clear. That was
I don't
consistent across the
disagree
board.
because it sounds like there's no consistency
Yeah.
currently. And I'm not being unkind. It's just a fact.
No.
Right, so financial information. This slide is for Savas. It's broken into 4 categories: professional development, one-time purchase materials, so things that we would buy next year and then use for the 6 years of the program. 6-year license materials, those would be like online student books, the student consumable materials, and then shipping costs. So the total cost for Savas, a little over 1.5 million. The portion of that that's allocated for ESSER is 565,000, which means the district cost would be $976,000. So the ESSER funds can only be used for 1 year. So we need to make sure that the first year of those 6-year license materials are used for ESSER. The other 5 must be paid for by the district.
Mr. Hoffman, when you say that the ESSER funds are paying for it, I get that to a point, but we can only spend an ESSER dollar once. And if we don't spend it amiss, presumably we could spend it on something else.
We'll take a look at that in a slide in a couple minutes,
Okay,
because
so
there
maybe I'm
are
mistaken about that.
there are containers of ESSER
Right.
funds based upon the application we wrote. So some of the ESSER costs have some restrictions to them, and Dr. Dandridge will explain that in a little bit. So if I can hold that question for just 1 minute, we'll get to that then. The next slide has the same information for wit and wisdom. Again, broken down into the same categories. This is the wit and wisdom cost is slightly cheaper than Savas. It ends up being 1.3 million. There's about 535,000 for ESSER and just 800,000, a little more, for the district cost. The next slide, I think, breaks it down, because I'm a taxpayer in this district too. So when you look at that, it's a big number. However, when you think about the fact that we're talking about between 550 and 575 students a year for 6 years across 7 grade levels, when you break out and figure out the per student cost per year, the Savas total cost is $65 a student. If you take out the ESSER portion, the cost to the district without those ESSER funds is $41 per student. For wit and wisdom, it's $56 for the whole thing. And then once the ESSER funds are taken out, it ends up being $34 per student per year. It's an upfront cost that we pay for those 6 years. And then we have those materials that keep coming every 6 years till the end of that contract. So when you do the math and figure it out, we end up over the course of those 6 years spending either $34 with wit and wisdom or $41 for Savas. And then the next slide has the ESSER information, and Dr. Dandridge is going to explain that for us.
So to give you a little bit more information about ESSER here in the district, and this is just a brief overview, but feel free to ask any questions you may have. In general, with ESSER 1, 2, and 3, plus the 7% of set asides that were awarded to Hempfield, we have about $10.3 million in all of that funding. ESSER 1 was completed this past September. ESSER 2 will be completed this coming September. And then ESSER 3 and the set asides are completed by September of 2024. Those dollars cannot be spent after that. Our application required a needs assessment, review of local strategies, stakeholder involvement, all that public review. It also has a requirement in ESSER 3, the ARP ESSER funds, which is where we're targeting these dollars, for a minimum of 20% reservation to address the impact of lost instructional time. In our application, those funds are designated towards programming costs for ELA and math. On the right-hand side, you can kind of see the breakdown of what we have currently in our application with that $10.3 million. Currently, 3.7 has been set aside for salaries and benefits, 3.4 for maintenance and HVAC, and 3.2 for programs, instruction, and technology. The 20% reservation that is required in ESSER 3 is approximately $1.22 million that needs to be spent for that learning loss in the programs of ELA and math instruction. That makes sense. Any questions on that? I know there's some ESSER's been brought up a couple times. I want to make sure you have all the information.
This is the only thing we could spend that money on to qualify.
That
We
one
use it on the technology side to pay for the new iPads or
We-
anything like that? I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying.
No, it has to address learning loss. And the way we wrote it into our application was for instruction, programming in ELA and math. So that's where the 18 months pilot comes in and all the work that we did to make a recommendation on how we would spend that 1.22. This is not the entire amount. Obviously, the ESSER dollars are 500 some thousand that are on the slide. There are other things that we are spending on it. We have purchased iPads. We've purchased a lot of instructional materials with those dollars. But this is one of the larger recommendations that we are making for spending that money.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Right, so the recommendation that we bring to you tonight is to adopt Wit and Wisdom in grades K through 6. This was a decision that we made, taking all of the data we've collected into consideration. I'm looking at the observations that we've all done in classrooms, seeing students interact with the resources, seeing teachers teaching with the resources. And this come after 18 months of work. So this was not done lightly. These are kind of the 9 big points that stick out as far as why Wit and Wisdom. Both programs were excellent. Our kids did great things with both of them. These are the things that make Wit and Wisdom take that one extra step above. The first is that it complements the use of Heggerty, foundations, geodes, and words their way. Wit and Wisdom does not have a phonics component. It doesn't have a spelling component. That's not what it does. It focuses on knowledge building, reading, and writing, listening, and speaking. We currently use Heggerty in grades K to 1 as our phonemic awareness program. Our teachers have been trained in that. It does great things for our kids. There's no reason to change that. Foundations is our phonics program for grades K 1 and 2. Again, it does great things. Special education teachers are trained in it. Our reading specialists are trained in it. All of our classroom teachers are trained in it. Geodes are decodable texts that we have that match the skills that are taught in foundations and match the topics in Wit and Wisdom. So the kids are reading text that they can decode about content that they are learning in ELA. It's the perfect match. And then in grades 3 through 5, we have many teachers who are already using Words Their Way for their spelling program. Wit and Wisdom allows us to continue to do that.
So this means for the teachers, they're not developing the wheel once again. They're using things they're already familiar with and tying Wit and Wisdom into it.
Correct. Second thing, we've talked a lot about rigor and that the standards require an increase of rigor that our current program doesn't have. We have seen that with both of these programs, specifically with Wit and Wisdom. The piece that we have seen tremendously with Wit and Wisdom is that all students are reading rigorous grade level text. All students are doing grade level work because of the scaffolds that are built in. We are not saying anymore, this 4th grader is only reading at a 2nd grade level, so they're not going to be reading the stuff that every other kid is reading. Those students are reading the same text, they're being exposed to the same content. They are being successful with that, and that's what we want to see. Strong writing component. We saw this with the data. We need to improve our writing performance. I have seen writing from kids, our teachers who come up in a little bit will share with you, the writing that they have seen from their students is unlike anything they've seen before. And so we feel like this is the program we need to increase the writing of Hempfield students. It's highly correlated to the science of reading. It is one of the programs that is science of reading. And because of the state structured literacy initiative, it will fit right in with the training that we are going to need to be providing to our staff. And then they will be able to implement that in their classrooms. When people think about ELA, they usually think about reading and writing. But if you look at the state's ELA standards, it's reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And Wit and Wisdom does an awesome job of integrating the listening and speaking. Students are involved throughout every module with listening to each other. We're actually teaching kids how to listen and then bounce ideas off of what they heard. Not be so consumed with what they're thinking and processing that they're not even listening to what their classmates are saying, but actually having to listen to what a classmate is saying and then beginning statements using portions of what a classmate has already said. So the listening and speaking components of this were a huge strength. It integrates extremely well with other content areas. You saw in the parent tip sheets how music and art is integrated. As we get ready to work on art and music curriculum in a few years in that 6-year cycle, if this program is adopted, we'll be able to make those natural connections to their art and music classes. As we look at science and social studies, each module has a connection specifically to science or social studies. So we're building that background knowledge as well. One of the pieces that we heard from students loud and clear with Savas was that they did not like only reading portions of the text. They wanted to read the whole book. So Wit and Wisdom, they are reading the entire book. They're building background knowledge in a variety of topics that are of interest to them. And that's witnessed by the high levels of engagement that we saw from kids. They are excited. Last month, I shared with you when I was covering in a classroom, when I got out the books for Wit and Wisdom, they literally cheered. That's how excited they were that it was time to start reading the books. They were very interested in the content, extremely excited for reading. I shared with you last time, a reading specialist went to pick up one of her students, and the student didn't want to come with her because she wanted to finish her writing project. That doesn't usually happen with kids who are struggling readers and writers. So what we've seen from kids is amazing. The fact that they want to take their birthday trip to the Air and Space Museum is an awesome thing. And then the final piece that we considered, looking with Mrs. Dicely, looking what does middle school ELA look like? What does high school ELA look like? Those students are reading entire texts. They are supplementing and connecting those with informational articles, with art, with music. And so this kind of correlation of everything melding together is exactly what they're going to see at the secondary level. So it makes the most sense to continue with a kind of program that does that at the elementary level as well. So we have that smooth transition.
Just before you go on, and I said this at one of our previous meetings, but just to add, when I'm going to say this again, when I was out visiting schools and I went through Farmdale and was touring on my own, I happened to go into a classroom that was piloting a program. It was a 5th grade classroom, and they were piloting with Wisdom. And again, I got to sit down with the student and I got to talk to the student. There was no administrator with me. The teacher was in the front of the room working with the small group. And I asked the student about the program, and her comment was something basically like, this program makes me think it's harder, but I'm also learning more. And that impressed me the day I heard it, and it still does with it. I think that sums a lot. I would guess, I don't know this student, I would guess she's probably one of the better students in the classroom, just from looking at the quality of her work and things, but still to have, a 5th grader tell me that, I believe she was being open and honest. That says a lot for the program in my mind.
As I visited classrooms, the conversations that I had with kids was amazing. The things that they're able to share from books, the reflection that they're able to do, the analysis of the text that they're reading, their ability to connect two texts together and compare characters, just extremely impressive. Next slide, we have some goals. As I mentioned, some of these go out over the long term. We really looked at some quantitative goals as well as some qualitative goals, because some of the qualitative goals we can really see very quickly. Harder to show with a number though, so we want to balance that a little bit. As I mentioned, our TDA scores need to improve. Currently, our average is a little less than 8. We would like to see that be 10 out of 16. If you look at state scores, very, very few kids get a 4. So we want most of our kids to be getting a 2 or a 3. That puts us about an average of a 10. So as a 5-year goal, that's where we'd like to see our TDAs at for our 4th through 6th graders. By 2028, the state's goal for the PSSA ELA is 75.1%. So 75% goal for proficiency on PSSA. Currently, we are in the 60s to 70%. So that gives us room to grow in those areas as well. Finally, with Acadience, our 5-year goal is to be at 80%. Our Acadience data right now, we have anywhere in the 50s to 60s to some grade levels up into the 70s. Acadians will tell you that if 80% of your students are proficient, it means your core program is working. That's why our goal is 80%. Our scores aren't there right now. Our core program is not working. So we need to do something different. And Wit and Wisdom, based upon the data that we've collected, will help us get there.
For the PSSA, the text dependent analysis questions that the kids read, are they mostly fiction or nonfiction?
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
And sometimes it's comparing a piece of fiction to a piece of nonfiction.
Okay.
And the beauty of Wit and Wisdom, one of the fourth grade teachers, Mrs. Fitzgerald, who spoke to you last month, she sent me a picture of one of her students writing, I think it was in October or November, and said, my kids wrote a TDA today, but they didn't know. And that's the beauty of the program, is we don't want to be doing TDA boot camp where all of a sudden 4 weeks before PSSAs we're TDAing kids to death. Like, that's not the point of this. The point was that her kids were doing it early on in the school year without even knowing they were doing it. So that's how we get them excited about writing and improve scores at the same time.
I guess I seem to remember when we were doing something related to high school, and I was sitting in on, I believe you were there, they were talking about the Keystone exams, and a lot of the things they do on the Keystone exams for language arts or for ELA. Text dependent analysis is an important part of that, if I remember correctly. And that's not necessarily something even at that level that we're, if I remember correctly, the discussions that going on in that group, that we're not that great at that level either.
Correct. So we need to make sure that we're boosting that writing at the elementary level, so that continues to flow the whole way up through the middle school and high school. And then the qualitative pieces we'd like to see through student writing samples, we'll be able to gauge that success with writing, which we've already started to see. And then, of course, we want kids excited about reading. That's the end goal. We want kids who love reading, and that's what what we've seen from this program, and one of the reasons we've selected it. So I have two teachers who are here tonight who piloted Wit and Wisdom. They have a couple of thoughts and comments to share with you. So I'm going to ask them to come up before I take a look at some of the next steps that we have. So Mrs. Caitlin Moore, she's a fifth grade teacher at Farmdale. And then Mrs. Hillary Buckwalter is first grade teacher at East Pete. And I told them they had to come up to the podium, which excited them greatly.
Option did not come up.
No.
All right, so hi, I'm Katie Moore. I'm a fifth grade teacher at Farmdale. And throughout this school year, I have been very vocal about my opinion to anyone who will listen about Wit and Wisdom. And it has been rave reviews from me all around. Initially, when we were learning about the different possible programs we could pilot this year, I was drawn to Wit and Wisdom for the fact that my students would be reading full novels start to finish. And that's always been a passion of mine, getting my kids in a book, reading it through and through, and really diving deep into one text. On top of that, they're reading real, authentic text, not contrived texts that are created for the purpose of teaching one lesson on theme for the week, and then switching over and teaching a small snippet of a story for character the next week. We can do all of those things in the books that are provided by Wit and Wisdom. So that really drew me in to want to try this program out in my own classroom. In addition to it being all encompassing, like Mr. Hoffman said, it has the reading component, it has a strong writing component, speaking and listening component. My students are holding their own Socratic seminars, so they're set up much like you are, and I'm standing back and they are full on leading the conversation. I don't say a word until the time is up, and every single one of my students participates with a loud, strong, confident voice, unlike mine right now. So then I started teaching it come August, and I fell even more in love with it. The engagement and participation from my students has been incredible. From my high performers to my average learners to my struggling readers, they are all confident because of the background knowledge that they've built throughout the program. They're confident raising their hand, taking risks, answering questions. They all have the opportunity, and Wit and Wisdom helped make the curriculum really accessible to all of my kids in a way that I haven't seen in the past 8 years at Hempfield. On top of that, the quality of the discussions they are having is impressive. I invite anyone into my room who wants to come in to talk to my kids and listen in to their think, pair, share, and mix and mingle, because you will be blown away at the level of conversation that my kids are having with each other. And then, as Mr. Hoffman was mentioning, the skilled writing that I am receiving from them. At the beginning of each module, you're supposed to look at the end of module task to get a idea of what are your kids going to have to do at the end of this unit. And when I looked at the end of module task for unit 1, I was nervous. I thought to myself, how am I going to get my 5th grade students to do this level of writing? And as I worked through the module, I was like, okay, here's where this is coming from. Here's where they're getting that piece. And it just pieces all of it together. And then they are able and were able to independently meet those high expectations by the end of the module. They analyzed Chief Joseph's Lincoln Hall speech and pulled out his core beliefs and values, and were able to give me a 5-paragraph essay with a well-developed thesis statement, text evidence, and elaboration like I've never seen before. Their fiction writing is equally as impressive with their dialogue and endings and strong word choice. So the writing I have seen has been really impressive for my 5th grade students. I'm here to say that my 5th graders are awesome with or without Wit and Wisdom. But I do truly think that Wit and Wisdom helped bring more greatness than ever out of my kids. And I really hope I get the opportunity to continue teaching it. As for the teachers of the district, I think everyone's probably a little mixed emotions about getting a new program. Over the past 7-8 years that I've been here, we've had the autonomy to teach things in the way that we want to teach them and approach topics in the way that we saw fit. And so I was a little nervous having a program telling me what to do, but I have not lost my craft as a teacher teaching this program. I feel just as much myself as a teacher right now as I did at the end of the year last year. And I don't think I've lost touch with all of the fun things that make me as a teacher. So I thank you for the opportunity to share this with you tonight. I welcome you into my classroom if you're interested in seeing it before you make any decisions on April 25th. But I truly believe that Wit and Wisdom has helped me become a better educator. It helped my students become better learners. And we're all better people from the lessons that it's helping teach them. So thank you.
And I will say, this is the classroom I was in, and when it followed up the parts about, you said the Socratic method. I don't know if you called it that then, but one of the things she finished, she was up in the front working with a small group, and it was getting near the end of the period or the end of the time, and the kids went off into groups like that. And I can't remember exactly what they were doing, but actually 1 or 2 of the students came over to me. They had to present what they had on there, and they were asking me, and it was just, I was listening to them and they seemed to get it. And I didn't read the book or anything, but they were giving me the same answers. So they were getting it. And yes, for board members, I would highly encourage you to go into her classroom to see it work. She doesn't bite. At least not much.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Hillary Buckwater. I'm a 1st grade teacher at East Petersburg Elementary School, and I wrote down what I'm going to say tonight, not because I didn't have enough things to say, but I was trying to keep it reasonable. I have a lot of passion for thinking about curriculum, not just in ELA, but It's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I care deeply about the curriculum because it helps me impact my students. So a few thoughts I have about wit and wisdom and implementing it this year. The first thing I'm going to say right out the gate, and I did tell Mr. Hoffman I was going to say this, the teacher manual is pretty cumbersome. In first grade, we have way too much material than what we could get through. Because we're also using the foundations and we're using Haggerty, we're using the Geodes books, and not every single part of every lesson is going to meet the kids where they are, but that is something that could be fairly easily mitigated if we just did some careful work this summer, giving first grade or primary grade teachers guidance on like what are the parts that we would really all agree need to be in there and how they match up with the standards tightly. My students have enjoyed working with the Wit and Wisdom text this year, and I have enjoyed using them. The modules, they introduce and review and reinforce skills over and over again. So just like in fifth grade, I'm looking at an end of module task and also a little bit freaking out, like how am I going to get 6-year-olds to write their own narrative, or how, I mean, it's a lot of the same tasks that we were doing before, but this just breaks it down. And then we go over a piece and we go over it again and we keep coming back to it. One of the highlights for me is that the fact that it uses authentic text. So each text we explore, we're going to get enough copies of the book for them to look at it in pairs. So for certain portions, if they're looking for something in a book, it's not just me projecting it. They're sitting, knee to knee with a buddy, looking through a copy of that book and, analyzing the illustrations, looking at the text. And they're getting the whole book. Like for them, they love to go to the library. It's like going to the library every day. They're new readers, so they really like engaging with books. And what this program does is it helps them to want to look at a book more than one time. So many times you'll see a kid look at a book and throw it, like, give me the next one, give me the next one. But this sort of asks them to look at the book through several different lenses. We can use one text for about approximately a week to teach all different types of things about building their knowledge and building their literacy skills. And every one of our modules asks these giant questions that we then take sort of weeks to explore. So one of the modules, the first one we did was the question that we were answering is, how do books change lives around the world? And then in that module, we connect to all different types of places. So we learn about the continents and we learn where different countries are and how people get books when they can't have them. And my kids this year picked out a quote from one of the books, and this isn't exactly it, but the effect was something like, books are as important as air and water. And when you think about the audience here, these are 6 and 7-year-olds who just want to read so badly. In the beginning of the year, it's like they're like so excited for it. I don't have to sell anything. They want to read. And when they hear that, they connect to it. Books are as important as air and water to them, and they believe it. And it was very interesting and very heartwarming to see them start to think about books that way. The core text, the grammar, and the writing lessons we used, they align directly with our foundations work. They align with our Geodes decodable books that we use in small groups. So every module will have a set of these decodable books that go with them. And they learn about the most fascinating things, like the most ancient library in the world that was guarded by cats. They learn about something called yardangs, which are like geographic features that are built by wind. I actually learn new things myself every day when we look through those books, but they tie in. So it's a little bit more of like teaching thematically. So we have sort of a overarching theme, and then everything we do is sort of relating back to that theme, which helps the kids own it. They're not borrowing that knowledge for a lesson. They're hearing it over and over again. So now they own that knowledge. And so they're taking time to analyze and understand what's in front of them in terms of the text. We take art and we analyze art so that we can kind of practice looking at things deeply. And then we look at text in the same way. And just as a personal note, before I moved to first grade, I was a fifth grade teacher for many years. And so right now I spend my days meeting my first graders right where they are. But I can't help but see them as the fifth graders that they will be. And I just think they will be so much more prepared than a lot of the fifth grade students than I'd had in the past, because they're already taking some of those, the very foundational things that we try to do in the upper elementary grades. We're learning about real literature in the primary grades as well. And I think that's really going to help prepare them, not just for fifth grade, but beyond, because, you know, TDAs are in the keystones and in AP exams and in everything that you do. And so you're going to take different texts, analyze and synthesize, and then write about that. And so we're able to do that for our first graders in a way that I think is really very comfortable, even for you know, our kids who are just newest to even thinking about literature. So I've been really impressed with Wit and Wisdom, and I would like an opportunity to kind of help streamline what, you know, the lessons and what they look like for teachers, and then continue to use it in my classroom.
So thanks to both Hillary and Katie for being here tonight. I also, again, want to thank all of our pilot teachers. They all volunteered, as you know, to pilot these programs this year. It was a lot of time and preparation on their part. And I appreciate all of their hard work. So kudos to them. Just last slide here. Next steps, as Dr. Dandridge, I think, mentioned, we'll vote. We'll have you vote at the April 25th finance meeting. After that, I'll let teachers know of your decision. If we decide to move ahead, this is kind of what comes next with the teacher training and supports. So Wit and Wisdom provides 2 full days of training. Our pilot teachers went through that training last summer. I think all of them would say it was extremely beneficial. The first day of training gives them kind of a philosophy of the program, how things are set up, how they work. The second day is called the module and lesson study. They actually dive into the first module. They dissect that module, find out what the essential question is they're supposed to be answering at the end. They see that end of unit, end of module task. And so they really dissect the module and find out what's going to be happening. They will then also provide us with ongoing professional development throughout the year for both teachers and principals. And then the last bullet here, as Dr. Dandridge, Mr. Romersky, and I talked about this, it's great that we have trainers from Wit and Wisdom who are willing to come and share, present, but then they leave. Their trainers are actually all teachers. So they are teaching in classrooms, teaching Wit and Wisdom. What we would propose to do by using some of those ESSER funds that are earmarked for that learning loss and instruction in both reading and math is to take 2 Wit and Wisdom pilot teachers out of their classrooms next year and put them on assignment as coaches, so that we have 2 in-house experts who can go into classrooms and support their colleagues next year. Whether that looks like co-planning, co-teaching, doing observations, giving them collegial feedback. That job embedded professional development is huge. I worked for many years as a math and literacy coach. I can attest to the strength that that has. Mrs. Rainier, one of our reading specialists and reading coaches, is here. We have a part-time reading coach in every building. Those coaches were really instrumental with both pilots this year in assisting with that, but they also have a caseload of students. So while we can use them for some of their time, we don't have them all of the time, and they can't necessarily work with all grade levels. So the ability to use 2 teachers in that capacity would be a huge asset in getting this program off on a very solid foundation and making sure that we have a successful implementation. So those are the next steps that we have, and I'll entertain any questions that you have remaining.
I just have like 2 questions. So one, going back to the goals, right? It seems like we could do a lot better with those goals, right? If we're looking at 5 years, we're not looking at much percentage increase. So my suggestion is, why don't we shoot higher? The other thing is I'm assuming you would be monitoring this along the way, like every year, 2 years, see if you're meeting those goals.
Okay. Yeah. So I think some of those goals, again, that's the goal in 5 years, but yes, we would continue to monitor that throughout. The Acadience 80% goal is set because that, as Acadience as a company says, if you're hitting 80%, your core program is working. So if we're above that, that's great, but that's where we need to meet. And right now we are in the 50s, 60s. So that's a pretty lofty goal.
I think one of the TDA was only, it's not very much increase. And I know I don't know all those goals in between, but I just think that.
Yeah, the TDA is kind of tricky because you get a 1, 2, 3, or a 4. And then that's quadrupled. So if you get a 4, that's 16. If you get a 3, that's 12.
Okay.
So you can't get a 14 on a TDA, you can't get a 10. So you can get a 1, 2, 3, or 4, which they multiply by 4. And the way the state scores them, very, very, very few students get a 4. We want our kids to be scoring in that 2 to 3 range. That's kind of what proficiency would look like. So it doesn't look like it's a huge growth, but that's somewhat due to the way it's scored by the state.
Understood. The other thing is a couple things on the pricing. If we're still using the Hagerty curriculum, what does that cost a year over the 6-year time frame? I'm assuming the Saxon would not use that curriculum because they have their own phonics curriculum.
Right. So those are resources that we already own. So there's no cost for those. Hagerty is a manual, Foundations is a kit that has a manual with it. So they are resources that we already have.
Question about the 2 teachers on assignment. How long do you propose they be on that assignment? And a follow-up question to that is, how long do you have the on-site trainers from quote Wit and Wisdom if that program were to be adopted?
Yeah, so the teachers on assignment would be for 1 year. So we would fill their classrooms with a long-term sub just for next school year as part of that implementation. The trainers from Great Minds, from Wit and Wisdom, they come, they do their training and then they go back. So that's why we're recommending those 2 teachers on assignment, because while they're here to do the training, they are also classroom teachers. So they're not available to us for the long term. Now they will come for multiple trainings to accommodate our teachers, and they do come back will come back throughout the school year to work with principals and teachers, but it's not someone who's like dedicated to us for the entire school year. It would just be for the specific training days that we book them for.
Most of the trainings with Wit and Wisdom would be on teacher and service days for the most part.
They would be on the AIS days that are over the summer.
But I mean, once the school year starts.
And then once the school year starts, we would also utilize them during some of the in-service days.
So the advantage of having the trainers, like I see the person, I don't even remember when the first in-service day is other than its beginning, but let's say the first in-service day was in October after school starts, then I may not see him again until Thanksgiving or
right.
sometime.
And the way our PD calendar works, it may not be till March.
So yeah,
right.
So the 2 teachers there would go around to the different buildings.
Correct.
And I'd have some, if I was teaching in East Pete, I'd have some idea that the trainer's going to be here this week and there'd be some sort of schedule set up that.
Right. And then so that those 2 teachers then become that consistent support that our teachers have throughout the year versus I'm here for a day in September and then you won't see me again maybe till March.
And this would be similar to the math coach we had this year, because I remember meeting that person during one of the visits at East Pete, and they said the teacher seemed to like that from.
Yeah, we've had very positive reactions to Ms. Casella working as a math coach with the district this year.
How long has the math coach been in place, just for perspective?
Just this school year.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Keener.
Thank you. The instructional coaches, so we're going to take 2 presumably very experienced, outstanding faculty members out of the classroom for a year and replace them with long-term subs. Would it be your expectation that the long-term subs would have an equivalent amount of experience? Or do you expect to fill them at the bachelor's step 1 level with some kid right out of college?
I mean, I don't know that I can answer that question as a long-term sub. Those are not contracts, so you would think it would. I don't know how to answer that question, but likely not.
Well, I mean,
Experienced
I guess
teacher.
another way to ask the question is,
Right.
what's the pool of long-term subs like? Are there experienced faculty members who maybe have taken a step back and would want to come in?
They're
In other
potentially.
words, I would want it to be an even Steven comparison. I would not want the students in those classrooms to suffer for the absence of an exceptional teacher for a year.
Well, and the benefit of the coaches is they are also able to work with those long-term subs in their classrooms to make sure that the instruction that's being delivered is of the same quality. And, you know, like you said, we have many times teachers who have been out of the classroom who come back and are looking for a way to come back in. And I will tell you that being in classrooms of lots of long-term subs, there are lots of really good long-term subs. Just because you're hired as a long-term sub without a contract doesn't mean that you're not delivering high quality instruction.
I'm not saying it does, but I've also, most of the resumes that we see for long-term subs are junior faculty members right out of college. And so I was just curious what your plan was, and maybe you don't know yet, and that's fine, but I just wanted to ask the question.
Yeah, until we have the positions posted and know who applies, we won't really know the answer to that question. But certainly with, you know, the assistance of human resources and our interview team with elementary principals, we hire the best candidates.
I need to ask a clarifying question. So the recommendation is that we vote on this on April 25th at the finance meeting. Is that inclusive of the 2 teachers on assignment serving as coaches?
That's
Or
not.
is that, can that be separated out? I mean, I may be down the road a little too far, but I just need to understand what this is going to look like and what you're asking for.
That's a recommendation we're making on the use of the ESSER dollars towards that learning loss to pay for those. It is not tied to the recommendation of the adoption of this program.
Because as we look at budget, I think that just needs to be something we consider as part of the whole.
Kind of a follow-up question with that. So math, we have 1. What's the need for the 2? Is it because wit and wisdom is a heavier lift? And if so, would Solvex require 2 as well?
Yeah, the ELA programs are definitely both a heavier lift than math. Our math coach is a retired teacher, and so she gives us at most 2 days a week. So we pay her by the hour. So she's not, it's not someone that we've taken out of a come-filled classroom and replaced with a long-term sub. She's an independent consultant that we contract with. And if she's utilized for those full 2 days, she is. And if she isn't, then we are not billed for that time. So,
but would you, so we're going from 2 full-time staff looking at that to 2 days a week. And then the Solvex, would that, because it's not as heavy of a lift, would you need 2 as well?
I think so, just because both programs are so much more encompassing than what the math is. You know, math was a different program. There were some changes. This is an entire philosophical difference of how to teach reading and writing. So it is for someone who has been teaching in a reading workshop model his or her entire career, this is a mind-blowing mind shift. And we want to make sure that our teachers not only receive the training to support them, but they have somebody right there with them to support them throughout the process as well.
I have another budget question. Jumping ahead to the budget discussion that we're going to be having next. Every previous budget update has included $1.5 million for wit and wisdom. I'm noticing that that's not in this latest proposal. So where is the $1.5 million? Well, the $1 million is not coming from ESSER dollars. What part of the budget is it now coming out of?
It is in there. It's just not identical. The prior presentations had $1.5 million set aside for the ELA program, regardless of which program it was. The difference in the budgets this year compared to past is we're not only budgeting on the expense side, but also the revenue side with the ESSER dollars. So that is built into this budget. And you're not going to see it from a presentation standpoint. But when I get there, it comes in the other expense line item. from an expense standpoint, which will be on slide 9, the second to last row. And I can get there and go over that.
Okay, because my question was, if you look at, and I know jumping ahead here, but as you look at slide 5, there's a $6.34 million increase in expenses. The 5 million in capital reserve, 1.3 million in salary increases, and 50,000 in debt service. The ESSER, this program has always been listed as an
Correct.
increase to expenditures.
Yep.
And I'm curious why it's not now
Yep.
being listed that way.
Because that's a very specific thing that I'm going to talk to with regards to that specific slide in terms of looking ahead with regards to our future budgets. So it's not that the budget, the $1.5 million is not there. I'll be making a point around slide 5 and that specific piece.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And to be 100% transparent about the financial information on the 2 slides in this presentation, those are our current quotes. We are getting an updated 2023 quote. We anticipate it's going to be very close, if not exactly to what the numbers are on that slide, but you might see a slight adjustment as we get that finalized quote.
Understandable.
I guess the last thing I'll say is that the Wit and Wisdom teacher editions and student editions for every grade level for all 4 modules are on the tables behind Mr. Donato and Mr. Walgamuth. There are also piles of all of the student books, which will come with that. Inside the book on the top is a list of all of those books as well. So for any community members who want to view those, they are there. They'll be in the boardroom here. And also for board members, if you'd like to look at them, they are here as well. Okay. And thank you very much.
Before we wrap that piece up, again, I want to thank our teachers. I see a couple of them here from the pilots, whether it was Sabas or Wit and Wisdom, who are here tonight. Not only are some of you pilot teachers from the math program on the onset of that, but your willingness to step in and say, yes, I want to try this, and put in a ton of time, energy, and effort for your students, but also for yourself. It hasn't gone unnoticed, and we're extremely thankful to each and every one of you for all the hard work you've put in over the last several years, specifically with this pilot over the last year, to be where we are today. So major credit and thanks to all of you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
I'd like to recommend that we take a 5-minute break. Is everyone okay with that?
Oh, yes.
And then we'll come back.
We'll reconvene at close to 9:10. It started. We can get started. It'd be terrific. I don't think I'm turned on. Mr. Graham, am I turned on? Thank you. No, I appreciate that actually. And we will, Mr. Bomerski, when you're ready.
All right, thank you. And now for our 23-24 budget update. As with, as Mrs. Hall has shared in past updates, if you just go to the next slide real quick, just focusing on our vision and mission, making sure that as we're working on a budget, it is, to make sure that we are providing that growth, achievement, and success for everyone, and also working to carry out the mission. If you go to the next slide, when you look at our comprehensive plan goals, that's also a piece that as we are identifying line items from an expense standpoint, making sure that we can tie it back to our comprehensive plan goals to keep you then updated as a board. Moving to the next slide. This is where we are as of the end of last week. So that would have been April 6th. We are at a point where our estimated revenues, $141,420,000, and our estimated expenditures, $145 million. So that's a deficit of 3.675, shortfall at this point. At this current stage, as we continue to bring things forward to you, that deficit of a $3.6 million deficit would require a 4.2% tax increase to balance the budget, or in some combination of other things. Over the last several weeks, teams of individuals have been going back into the budget line by line, looking for any areas that potentially were redundant, budgeted for twice, and or looking at things that we potentially could scale back when we see new numbers coming in on things with regards to what's being projected in different departments. So a tremendous amount of time has gone into that process. If you look at the next slide, again, the revenue max increase when you look at our index of 4.1, I'm sorry, 4.8, that would give us $4.2 million in additional revenue, because $875,000 in revenue is generated for every 1% tax increase. Okay, so the next section here, to Mr. Keener's point a little earlier, I just wanted to draw your attention to some things with regards to this budget, and also then looking ahead to potential future budgets. One of the pieces that we've been having conversations at Building and Grounds and Finance Committee meetings is looking at how do we put money away from a capital project, have a reserve standpoint to address our building deficits. And so as a board, you've tasked us with building in $5 million to that capital reserve as an expense line item. So looking at that $5 million, plus looking at what we're contractually obligated with in terms of our collective bargaining agreement, that's $1.29 million in salary increases, and our increase in debt service for next year, which goes up about $50,000. Assuming we were to do nothing else, that the $5 million, the 1.29, and the $50,000. So the point here is that would require $6.3 million increase in revenues, or to offset those expenses, or find ways to reduce our expenses in some way, shape, or form. That $6.34 million will never be closed by our max index of 4.8 million. So in the end, we'd be short about $1.5 million. Now, tack on expenses for things going up, looking at adding a reading program, looking at if there's need for new staff, increases for other areas, et cetera. All of those adds in the budget add to that total expenditure piece. So looking ahead, if we were to do absolutely nothing with keep our budget as is, as it was the prior year, and just do that alone, again, the tax increase wouldn't work. So the point of this is looking long-term and looking in this current budget. If we are going to maintain this current line item, especially on that $5 million, we are going to have to do things differently, and we are going to have to start making decisions around things that will or will not be funded in order to make ends meet. If you go to the next slide, this is just the breakdown of tax increase scenarios. based on the median assessed home value within our community of $196,500. You would see what the real estate mills would look like, as well as the real estate taxes that would be due. It's an annual piece there. So, to look at that monthly, you would break that down, but that's what you would see based on different options from a tax increase standpoint and what that would do, again, to the median assessed value. If you look at the next slide, and so if you look back over the last 6 years, our average index that we potentially could have raised taxes up to was 3%, if you look at from an average standpoint. Our average tax increase over the last 6 years has been 1.61%. So definitely working hard to make sure that, we're keeping costs down and trying to minimize that tax increase. When you look at our budget moving ahead to the next slide, looking at things by revenue, clearly the local tax impact for our district is significant. Over 71% of our revenue comes from local taxes. The state is about 27%, a little more than that, and federal funds just over 1%. If you go to the next line item, or next slide, you'll see our budget expenditures for 23-24, but look back to the 22 actual budget, the 23 current budget that we're in, and then what we're projecting ahead. You'll see that salaries are up about 4.13%. We've budgeted a 3% increase over the 22-23 budget. This does include the incentives for our support staff, and they were not included in the 22-23 budget because that was straight out of ESSER, and we made a change this year to make sure we budget the revenue coming in with revenue with ESSERs as well as the money going out on the ESSER side. So wanting to make sure we're clear on that. And the support staff incentive that was not included is about 800,000 from looking at the ESSER dollars. Our benefits are down, but it's important to note that while medical is up about 1.6%, PSERS goes down for the upcoming year, goes down about 1.26%. But as you know, the fluctuation of PSERS, that will go back up. So looking ahead to the 24-25 budget, that PSERS amount will go up, and that's based on our salaries. Transportation is up.
You're sure that will go up, or
That's what's currently projected. Yep. Transportation is up about 5.67%. That's a contract that we have. Our transportation contract ends in June of 24, so we'll begin that process over the next year to bring to you recommendations. Our special education, if you look at that line item, it's down just a little over 1%. And that's due to fluctuation of students and programming, not only in the district, but also outside of the district. Our tuition is up about 2.82%. This includes our charter, CTC, and special ed placements. And as you recall there, on the special ed placement side, that's again, students either moving into the district that have significant needs that we are unable to have programming for. So we find that placement for them. The CTC budget went up about $200,000 from the prior year. But again, we have more students attending the CTC, though we are looking at other options for our students beyond the CTC with other entities. Our debt service goes up slightly, a little over 0.5%. As you recall from all of our refinancing that we've done, we've been very successful with our refinancing to be able to recoup a lot of savings on those refinances. But there was, as we look ahead to next year, it's a slight up and then it goes back down. So you do see a little bit of fluctuation there. The cap reserve line item, you'll see the last 2 years we have not budgeted for, with the exception of this current budget where we moved money in at the very end for positions that we were not filling. And that was at the direction of the board. But looking ahead, we are budgeting the $5 million as requested. You see the other expenditures is up about just under 10%. It's 9.93. That does include 1.55 million for the elementary ELA program. Again, about 500,000 is offset by ESSER revenue, and that's just other day-to-day expenses. However, if you do look back to the 22 actual, we are still below that line item. We do see about a $6.34 million increase due to cap reserves, HEA, and I talked about that on slide 5. So again, all of these pieces that we look at to try and make sure how do we figure out ways to balance this budget? I will say it is important to note as we are looking at these expenditures, as we try to figure out ways to reduce our expenses, there are a few line items that we simply cannot just take a flat percentage. That was a question that was asked. So when you look at things like benefits, transportation, special ed, debt service, or the cap reserve, I mean, we have some flexibility on the cap reserve, depending on where the board's threshold is, if we want to bring that down or not. But we cannot just remove a certain flat percentage off of transportation or special education due to commitments. So those are things that we have to look at, and that really then narrows our options. So if you go to the next slide, Mr. Graham, what you'll see there is, where we have flexibility in terms of yes or no options day to day falls in the salary side with regards to potentially not replacing positions as they come up for open positions. We review them to determine, is that something we need to replace or not. That definitely is a big driver when you look at 70% of our budget consists of salary and benefits. Benefits are defined benefits, so it is difficult when you are already in a contracted plan to be able to reduce those. We do find continuous ways to try and bring down some of those benefit options from a savings standpoint by different things through prescription drugs, et cetera. But because of PSERS fluctuating, and there's some defined commitments there, that also makes it difficult. Again, the only other area that we have the good flexibility around would be the cap reserve and other expenses. If you look at that other expense line item, we're not that far off again from where we were in the 22 school year. We're just up a little over $1 million compared to where we were last year. If you look at that slide. When you look at our fund balances, this is presented to you a couple times a year, but absolutely always presented when our auditor is here presenting end of the year balances. You'll see where things are in terms of the general fund. And it's important to note that that first line item of the general fund is actually made up of multiple funds, which I'll get to on the next slide. All the other pieces there, we have a debt service fund. And again, that can only be used to offset debt. We have our capital reserve fund, which can only be used for capital projects. We have a cap project fund. So that's projects related to the bond funded construction project. So you will see that decrease as the remaining bond dollars are utilized over the next several months. Our internal service fund, hospitalization, workers' comp, unemployment, you see a decrease in that. And if you recall, that's what a recommendation from the auditors in the past was to start utilizing some of those dollars instead of it just sitting there because it is a fund that was intended to be used. And then our final piece of the custodial fund that connects back to student-led clubs and activities, which we are working to make sure our students are spending the dollars in the student activities fund. Again, taking out food service because food service is its own internal service fund and it should be removed. It's not included in ours. You'll see where we're at the end of June was about $50 million. It is important to note, and this was made public during the Auditor General's information and we talk about this with our own auditor. We have a little over 3 months of operating expenses in our funds. So that's an important piece to be mindful of. And just as our legislatures are taking opportunities to talk about the importance of putting dollars away for future needs, and we need to do that as well. We can't just keep spending all of these funds down and not replacing in any way, shape, or form. But if you go back to that first line of the general fund of that $24 million, this is the breakdown of that fund. So we have some things here that are non-spendable inventory, prepaid expenses, and that's more of an annual piece that's there. We do have a restricted scholarship fund that we're actually trying to work and move that off our books so it can be utilized. It hasn't been used for a while, so we're working through that process. Our retirement fund to be able to offset from PSERS should we have an issue there. So we have $3 million set aside. Our assigned capital reserve to be able to be used for other capital projects is $11 million. That does not account for the other capital line two funds that I shared on the previous slide. And then our unassigned.
Mr. Romanski?
Yep.
Is there a reason that we don't move that 11 million over into the capital reserve fund?
That would just require board action, and I don't have specifics as to why we necessarily couldn't do that. I think the one piece we do need to be mindful is when you put it into the cap reserve fund solely for capital projects.
Right.
Once the board puts that in there, then it's
Right, well, we
set.
call that-
But you can put it into the capital project fund. That was from a bond standpoint, and Mr. Mauer, do you?
It then becomes legal and binding, Grant.
Right,
What
but
we
can
did
also
was
move it.
if I may finish.
Yeah.
We assigned the most current year's expenditures
Adam.
in that balance as a reserve for these upcoming capital expenses. So we looked at our long-term capital budget and we said, we know we have 11.2 coming up for this coming year. So that's why we allocated it that way. So we have flexibility if we need it. Otherwise, we're bound legally to retain those funds,
Okay.
which you don't want to do at this point.
Yep. And then again, the unassigned, it cannot exceed 8% of our total prior year expense per school code. We're currently at just a little over 7%. So we're not at the full 8% there. So that makes up that general fund component.
Thank you.
So then it brings you back to where we're at. Again, where we are currently as of today would require a 4.2% tax increase. The next slide just reinforces again what those options could be. But from a next step standpoint, it is important that we begin the process of determining if there will be a tax increase, what that will be. At the May 9th board meeting, we do need to adopt a resolution to display and advertise our final budget. That's a critical component here because we are then bound and from a timeline standpoint, while the board technically has till the end of June to approve a budget, we want to try and make sure that we are in that process to display and advertise. And then we'd be hopeful that we're at a point where we can approve on June 13th, which would allow our team to be able to enter all of this information that's needed on the state side to get it into the state on time. But if we can go back to Mr. Graham, slide 13. Never left it. Perfect. I'm going off of mine here. And wanting to engage in discussion about some potential next steps and kind of where the board's thoughts are at this point with regards to tax increase to kind of help us figure out other potential options for trying to come up with some solutions to close the
Question, just so I understand this, so on the revenue side, that 141 and almost $500,000, that includes the ESSER funds, like for if we approve the new textbook series, because we've included the whole cost of that in there, correct?
It includes what would be permissible through the spend of through the fall of 24. Yes, and there could be some minor fluctuation once we see some final numbers, just as we get confirmation, but yes.
And also with the revenues, I don't remember the figure, but if we got $10 from the state last year, to make it a simple thing, we're getting $10 this year.
Correct. So you can recall when we did our initial preliminary budget last year, we flat funded like we have historically. And as we progressed through the spring, we received information that we were getting additional dollars from the state. So we have budgeted in next year's budget what we are currently getting to date from the state. And that does include that slight increase from the prior year.
Right,
Our
but
hope
it
would be
doesn't
that would
include,
continue.
the governor's budget had us getting between special ed and basic education funding, a little more than $1.5 million.
Correct.
Dollars.
Yep. So that extra 1.5 million is not included in our estimated revenues for the 24-25 budget, 23-24 budget.
So it's fair to say this is worst case right now.
This would be worst case flat funded by the state with our current dollars. Yes.
And I guess I'll start the discussion with this question for the board. While I wouldn't want to assume we're going to get the whole $1.5 million, would it be reasonable to say that we're going to get $500,000 to add in there if you, or even the 675, which takes it from a 4.2% tax increase, I think, down to a 3.5% tax increase. And if we get nothing at all, that instead of 5 million, we put in 4.2 million in the capital reserve. Or 4.3. And I guess that's my first fault. Why I wouldn't want to do that. I just considering they lost the lawsuit, considering there is some movement in there. We may not see it until this time next year until they get a budget, but I would think there would be something in there, which, you know, I
I asked that question at the committee meeting and everybody said, don't assume it, but I think you're bringing up a valid point.
and I guess the other part to that is we're, you know, again, the idea is to put money in there. Yes, the $5 million would be great, but if we get nothing at all, if you assume, you know, if you assume 600,000, we're going to put in 4.4 million with the tax increase, which again, from everything I've understood, and Mr. Maurer, you can help with this, to keep our high bond rating. They want to see us putting money in. It's, you know, it'd be nice if, you know, the Gates Foundation would give us $4 billion and we wouldn't have this problem, but that's not going to happen. So.
Yeah, basically, the 5 million is giving our taxpayers a large tax increase. And I just want to be careful here. We think we might need a new high school renovation, but we still don't really know what we're doing. And my other point is, if the money that we take from our taxpayers now is worth a lot more than bonds, because ultimately we're still going to have to borrow a big chunk of it. Bonds 10, 15 years down the road, and the net present value, you'll be surprised, it might not be helping us as much as you think. I'm also concerned with the high rate of inflation now. Our taxpayers, our community are getting hit, myself included. Food price increases, electricity, gas. I mean, 3.5%, 4% tax increase above everything. And we're mainly doing it for 5 million for cap reserve, which I'm not sure we really need, or it makes sense economically, financially. So I have concerns with a high tax increase. I'm not in favor at this point.
I have a couple of comments and questions, but fundamentally, I want to go back to a question I've asked a while ago that I don't know that I've received an answer to, but that I've pulled some data on even just while I've been sitting here. My question is, what is our cost per student? And the one thing that does help us with is it helps us understand how we're doing with our expenses. And there's two parts to this, and we don't control a lot of the budget, but we do control a little bit of this. And the part that we control is our tax increase and some of our expenses. So my question is, do we know what our cost per student is going into the budget season? It's an important number as we kind of get a gauge of how well are we doing on our expense side. I'll give you some examples. Warwick, 16,220. The county average, the state average is about 17,000 and change per student. The school district of Lancaster runs about 23,365, and these are 2023 numbers. My understanding is if I did my math based on our expenses and our approximate number of students, we would be running around 20,728 per student. That's not an official number for the record. Also, Manheim Township runs a little less than that if my number's close at $20,060 per student. Manheim Central runs at $18,536 per student. So when I look at these, some of these numbers vary a little bit, but it tells me that we have some opportunity on the expense side. Now, that's where I count on the administration and the team to come up with what those look like. If we're running 2 classes of German with 5 students in each class, that can be a concern. And that's an opportunity for us to look at how can we provide options, but how can we make sure that we're being efficient with the use of our personnel? As you saw in the graph, there's 71% of our expenses are our people. They are our most valuable asset, but they're also almost 3/4 of our expenses as well. And so we have to be prudent in how we're running those classes and making sure that if we're going to run a class with someone in it, that it makes sense to run that class with a few number of students in it. I only bring this up because I think it's important that cost per student is extremely helpful in telling us how are we doing from an expense side. And then you can back into some of this. I will agree with you, Mr. Maris, that we often go into a year with a deficit, but I would always rather budget on the conservative side, not expecting to have the money until the money's in the bank. Because if you count your chickens before they hatch, that's when you get in trouble. I do disagree with you in the fact that if we don't begin to set capital dollars aside and we have to borrow all the money, we will crush the taxpayers at some point. It may not be while I'm on this board, but we'll leave the next board a hot mess. And so I'd rather take the lead in pushing the envelope a little bit with the taxes, not to a 3.5 or a 4.5 or 4.8, which is the max, but probably closer to maybe a 3, which I know is probably not going to sit well with you either. But if I had to land on a number today, a 3 is still going to leave us with a deficit that may be made up by the state, but also could be backed into by using those capital reserve dollars, which I'd prefer not to touch. But if we had to touch them, at least we'd be able to make payroll. The only thing I would tell you is I've always been committed to living within my means. And I think as a district, we have to be committed to living within our means going into this budget. And it's not as egregious as it looks, but also I'd rather plan for the worst. And my motto is hope for the best. Let's plan for the worst and hope for the best. We're not going to have too much money at the end of the day. That's a given. Even if we went 4.8%, we got plenty of places that we need it and can use it. We're not going to be sitting pretty and buying a beach house next week with this extra money. There's not that much extra. And even the amount we're putting away of $5 million is honestly a drop in the bucket. If we have to do a renovation on the high school or a complete overhaul. And to my point, I'll take a breath here in a second, but to my point with the high school, at the end of the day, something needs to be done. We've got over a 23-year-old high school. It's at least that. The mechanicals and everything are failing. There's not an option to do nothing. So these dollars are not getting set aside for the potential that we don't need to do anything. That building's outlived its life. It needs either an overhaul, which will be millions of dollars, millions, or a complete tear down and rebuild. The dollars are not going to go to waste. We're talking about, what do we say, maybe $24,000? It's pennies on the dollar when you look at this. And even a 4.8% taxing isn't going to have us living large. So my point is, I think we need to be very careful because when we look at what we spent years before I was on this board, we underspent on some of these things. And I'm not being critical. I'm just saying, when you look at the percent we spent on our buildings, there was a gap there from where we should have spent. That's why we are where we are. So I don't want to leave that mess for somebody else down the road. I'll get off my soapbox, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to support a 4.8. I'm not going to support a 1 or a 2. I would probably be right around a 3, to be honest with you.
I don't disagree with a lot of your comments, and I think the first one was directed at Mr. Donato, assuming some of that money. But anyways, I don't
Not
think
specifically at you, but I know you don't want to push.
I don't think the 5 million cap reserve is going to make the big difference, and I don't think our taxpayers are going to be crushed by borrowing more, possibly extending our bond terms. And I can talk to you offline, but I don't think it's going to crush the taxpayers. And quite frankly, to encumber the taxpayers harder now, and the dollars are worth a lot more now than they will be 10, 15 years ago. And that's how bonds are going to work for a big high school. So this additional tax increase that we're proposing to fund capital reserve to fund a high school, what I'm telling you is insignificant in the impact it's going to have. And it's not going to make a difference whether the school gets crushed down the road. So I disagree with you, and I'll be glad to talk to you offline.
I want to address that point as well.
I was just going to answer his question.
Oh.
His first question in terms of the per pupil spending based on.
Mine was an estimate. Thank you.
So based on our budget and final numbers from last year, we're $16,302. And in comparison across the county, it was $17,277. So we're under that county average. Now, looking ahead, you're going to bump it up because we have additional expenses here. So you're going to see potential increase, but until final numbers are done and average daily membership comes into play, we won't know our final number per se.
Yeah, I was running an estimate, but I was taking the highest number that we had in here.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, as you go up,
Probably
because
millions
that was
more.
Not our current budget, the prior one. So we'll know what our per pupil spend is at the end of this current budget cycle. But looking ahead, it obviously would be higher because we have significant increase in expenses.
That's fair. Thank you.
Yep.
No, I'd like to address Mr. Maris's point about the 5 million for capital reserve. And I think it's important to remember that this is not sort of a one-off $5 million. This is the beginning of a fundamental rethinking of how this district plans for its ongoing capital needs. Historically, we frankly have not done a great job with this. And that's not to cast aspersions on any board or any board member. We've often taken the course of short-term expediency over long-term sound fiscal planning. If we begin budgeting $5 million a year with organic growth built into it, think about the model that Mr. Brooks built. We will at some point, probably in the mid to late 2030s, reach a point of equilibrium where where our district can be debt-free on the capital reserve side. And then that $9–10 million in debt service, we're going to be funding these things as we go and saving the taxpayers millions and millions of dollars every year. But to get to that point, we have to make some hard choices now. We cannot continue to kick the can down the road and say, oh, we'll just float some more bonds. Yes, right now we have a AA2 rating and can borrow. If we don't plan for the future, that rating is going to drop. We're in an environment of increasing interest rates, and we're going to discover that the financial flexibility that all of us take for granted is not going to be there. So yes, I agree that $5 million is a lot of money, and it will account for a significant part of whatever tax increase this board votes on. I concede that point. That is necessary pain now to avoid far greater pain a decade or two down the road.
And I quite frankly think that's not going to happen. We're always going to have debt. And to say we're going to get to a debt-free position by saving 5 million a year back, it's not going to happen. To me, that's a pipe dream, in my opinion. Quite frankly, that money and look at what you're going to encumber the taxpayers doing that. That's going to take what, 10–15 years at a much higher tax increase. And what's our ultimate tax number going to be? I think ultimately it will hurt the taxpayers more than help them.
Putting away savings in an account has never hurt the homeowner, and the philosophy is the same. And I'll explain it this way because I've explained this to people that don't understand. It's basically our tax increase is our income. And so when they look at our bond rating, they look at our income. So if we raise taxes 1% this year, that scares the lender. They say your income just dropped. Whenever you go to loan for a house or any type of loan, they're first going to look at your income. They're also going to look at your debt and your expenses. That all weighs into how much interest they're going to charge you. And so whenever we can put money aside and we can keep a solid bond rating, and that involves putting money into the bank in a savings account, in essence, we get better rates every day, all the time. And whenever you can put more money down on your house, you get better rates. The philosophy with $20 million or $5,000 is the same. And saving money is a philosophy that is a principle that you use as a homeowner. So not to get too crazy and passionate about this, but this isn't rocket science. It's very simple, basic principles. So saving $5 million a year is not going to hurt the taxpayers in the long run. Not doing what we need to do today will absolutely hurt them decades from now.
Yeah, I guess I fundamentally disagree on that concept, because dollars today are worth a lot more than 10–15 years. And we know we're not going to be able to raise enough money to build this high school. So to go ahead and say that's going to help us that much, I don't think it's going to be as significant as what you're saying.
It's a long-term plan. You're right. In the short term, doesn't look like much. It has to be the long-term.
And I would say if we didn't have to increase the tax 4–4.5%, I'd love putting 5 million away, but that's ultimately what the tax increase is going to fund the capital reserve towards a building. And what I'm saying is you're still going to have to borrow a big chunk of it. I'm not against putting some, but do we need 5 million? Is that reasonable?
I just have kind of two follow-up questions. There was a couple things that when the bond guy was here, he said that to reach whatever our potential goal is, he gave a millage that we need to do to get there. He gave a path to get there. Does this fall in line with that path? Because I don't have those numbers ahead of me. I know one of you guys are the And then the other kind of follow-up with that is what are the other districts? Last year we had a model as far as other districts, their increases, things like that. Where does any of our increases fall with other districts?
If you look at our tax increase history, year over year, we are way behind what other districts have been doing. And it's precisely why we're in the situation we are. And to the points Mr. Keener and Mr. Wogelmuth have made, we have not been strategic in our planning fiscally. We've gone year over year, made ends meet because we have individuals on this board who continue to say, well, we can't do more than 1%. And the fact is, we can and should fiscally to put us in a better fiscal state. Looking just a few short years down the road, we've been blinded by this conservatism.
Mr. Bremersky, what did you say our average tax? You said 1.6% over how many past years?
1.61 over the last 6 years.
6 years. And did our bond rating change at all during that time?
Yes.
It got reduced.
Decreased.
It decreased? From what to what?
I don't remember exactly.
It just went, at one
It went
point, it
down
went
a
one
blip.
level down and then
AA
it's
And
one.
then
back
it
up.
stayed
Back up.
there.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're
I
back. to-
believe, I'm sorry.
And now we're
I believe
back.
With AA1 to AA2.
Right. And
Right.
then-
Yes.
And then we went
That's
back.
correct. And then we went back.
Just, Mr. Wogmuth, to your point, for around a 3% tax increase, we would need to either find ways to reduce the expenses by about $1 million. Continue off of this.
Which again, that's assuming no money.
That's assuming no new state
That's no
money.
new state money.
Any new state money that, we've always talked from a recommendation standpoint to put any new money directly into the cap savings plan.
So basically, if we got none, we'd be reducing the cap reserve from 5 million to the money we're putting into 4 million. If we get.
If we get zero.
If we get
Yes.
zero.
We get zero, we wouldn't end up with a $5 million increase to our cap reserve. That's
Cap
the
reserve-
risk.
Sorry.
No,
A
that
cap
Justin-
reserve is our insurance in essence against some of the other things that could come up or the
Yes.
lack of state funding.
Correct.
Would we like to put that 5 million away? Yes, but if we
Yes.
end up with a shortfall, I think we do have a little bit of a backup plan, so we aren't in crisis
Correct.
mode.
Yeah,
I would still like us to look at how can we make sure that the programs we're running are efficient and effective and that we don't have situations where we have wasted dollars within the district. And when I talk about wasted dollars, I'm talking about dollars that don't impact education and hopefully wouldn't change program options, but that we're running those efficiently so that we don't have to in the future look at limiting our program options. And that may be something, some school districts have already had to do that.
Correct.
They've had to get rid of some optional programs because
Correct.
they've not been able to afford to run them.
Right, and that's where it comes down to when you look at that pie chart, again, the breakdown of the salary side. I mean, it's a driver, the other expense line item, those are the first two areas that we look. And so that's where, from a opening standpoint, when we have positions that are open, we don't always fill, though people want the positions filled because, we've had them and we want to be able to provide those opportunities. We do look at kind of the impact, particularly when it comes to at the elementary level with class size. We've been trying to run for many years before my time here was 25K to 2, 28, 3 to 6. And if we don't need to fill positions because those numbers are okay, then we don't fill them. At the middle school level, it's a little more challenging because that's a teaming structure. So if a social studies teacher leaves, we still need to find a person. It could be someone else that, if we have another retirement moving into that position. But then at our high school, it's driven based on the requests of classes that students are looking to take and what we're offering. So that's where we do look at class size. And if we don't run this, then what's the impact? I know Dr. Rossman and the team are currently working on the schedule for next year. And we're, just the end of last week, they were sharing it's about an 85% fill rate on the first choice request for students. So it's not like we're up in the 90s. So there are students who are not going to be getting their first choice. And so those are things, from an impact standpoint. Could that number still fluctuate a little bit? Sure. Are they still working at it? Absolutely. But that's some of to your point about, what we're looking at. We're also looking at, other things in terms of replacement cycles. We have I believe it's 2 vehicles that are on order for this year that probably won't be coming in because of supply chain. And so, we've had conversations, do we need to, bump that out a year? Do we need to be on that constant replacement cycle? We've had conversations around the technology. Is there ways to potentially stretch that? So those are things that, we're looking at. But there are items that are difficult and we can adjust. Our debt service we're committed to, unless we refinance in some way, shape, or form, but now's not a time to refinance. Rates are much higher than what we've gained over the last couple of years through our refinancing.
And currently, we've basically refinanced
What
the
we can.
majority of what
Correct.
we can.
So that's a definite.
We have taken advantage of every opportunity.
Transportation, there's a little bit of fluctuation there. If we don't need to run a specific bus based on utilization of students who are actually riding the bus. Mr. Frank always is looking for ways to find savings there. On our special ed side, Dee's worked hard to make sure that, unless it's specific programming needs, it's here in the district. We've also done some cost analysis to determine based on some of the programming, is it more effective to have the program here or out? And sometimes it's more effective to have it here, and other times it's more cost effective and probably better for the student times to have it out. So those are pieces that we look at as well. So it's a continuous process, and to your point, we'll keep going back and looking. I would expect the number to be able to fluctuate a little bit. I don't know that we'll be able to find a full another million out of what we've done, given that where we started at the onset of this, the preliminary budget at 6 million. Now, granted, the revenue went up slightly with semester dollars coming in, but that's something that we have to keep looking at.
I don't want to pick on the other departments too much, but I also want to state that, there's obviously mission critical things that take place around education. And there's some auxiliary departments. I don't want to forget about them. And I'm not going to pick on you, Mr. Graham, but I think of IT, it's a very important piece of everything that we do, but are there opportunities there? And positions potentially, or things that are not mission critical related to the school district. So I don't think it just involves a classroom and
Correct.
class size,
Yep.
some of those things. It needs to be every aspect of the organization.
Yeah,
And-
absolutely.
And as I say it in, kind of a business language, but we really need to look at it in
Everything.
that light.
And that's why we've gone kind of line by line. And so technology, Mike has provided reductions in the budget from the onset of this, as every area, that we've looked at. So.
And as a reminder to our board, we took a totally different approach to our budget this year. And we went back to every single department head and pushed it down and said, where can we cut? What else can we do? So we did try to be innovative and push it down as far as we could. To your point, Mr. Wogelmuth, I'm sure there's some. There always is. You always can find a little bit. I mean, to our administration's credit, they've come back and they brought it down from 5.1 million down to 3.7. So they've already done a lot of hard work. Are we overreaching to ask for more at this point, given that we're trying to increase $5 million? I would say yes. We've done a lot of work this year.
I state some of that just for the benefit of those listening, that we have taken a hard look at our expenses, but this isn't the last year to do that. There'll be
Absolutely
ongoing opportunities that maybe we can continue to address that we couldn't tackle, or that won't hit year over year until there's some time to work through those things. You can't just go in and cut and slash and expect things not to fall apart. You have to do it methodically and appropriately.
You're correct.
I do just one, and I'm for putting the money aside. I'm the person from the beginning, even before some of our newer board members said we need a new high school. We need something done to high school. Remember that. And I'm for putting the money there. I guess my question, I understand what Mr. Keener's saying, but if we could stretch it, we're not going to be able to stretch out remodeling the high school, building a new high school. LMS is, again, my daughter, who's 42, was the first class when she was 14 there. So it hasn't been renovated. LPC has not been renovated. We have Centerville Elementary School, who we run dehumidifiers on the one wing down below so these are all things that, you know, it'd be nice if you could wait till 13 years. It'd be nice if we could pay off all our debt. That would be another way of doing this, but we are going to borrow money, you know, whether we're on the board or not, before the 13 years are out. Now, the more we can have to reduce the cost. So again, I do support putting the money in there, and I guess I don't have a problem with that, because again, when you borrow money to buy a car, but house, they require a certain amount, or the more you could put down, the better it is for us. And it would help keep our bond rating size it can, which again is going to help lower the cost whenever the board borrows the money.
Yeah. And we are hoping to have the feasibility study completed goal by the end of September. So. Great.
Thank you. And how, just to keep moving along, I will go with a 3% tax increase with the $1 million, assuming it would come from the state to make up the difference. And if not, then we're putting $4 million away instead of 5. But we are putting money in there. And I checked Mr. Bermersky's math and did think so.
It'll be
It's about right.
3.06.
Yeah, so,
based on
yeah.
that number, and
Yeah.
there's still work to be done. Smaller things. But.
Are we going to discuss again in the April 25th Finance Committee
Yeah,
meeting?
I just was trying to get a
Karen will
sense.
be back then?
Yep. So she pulled everything together here. We had worked on different scenarios. So, you know, depending on where we thought maybe conversation would go, being able to show you what it would look like. You know, a 3% median, tax increase would be $102 on the median assessed value. So. Is there anything else other than, I mean, we will continue to look, but from a standpoint of the board, I also just want you to know that if all of the money that was proposed by our new governor would come to us, not expecting it all, but if it were, it would bring things down to a 2.45% tax increase. And that includes the $5 million still in there.
It's too bad the government can't give us the number before we finalize our budget, which is the way it should work.
And see, this is one area where I think as board members, and I'm guilty of this too, we should reach, there's proposals out there that they do a 2-year school funding things. Maybe we would know because we'd be at the end of the second year, but if they would give us a 2-year funding source, we would know each year. We wouldn't be in this spot every year. At least there'd be 1 year that you could do the budget and say, it's there that we're getting $1 million. And I don't think that's, we need to reach out. The public needs to reach out to our representatives to do that. It's very unfair for us to sit here and hope we're going to get something and come up with a budget. And they could drag that on, even if we get the $1 million or get the $1.5 million, we may not get it until this time next year.
Yep. Some of us have that opportunity again on Thursday.
Yeah, if you're going on Thursday, there you go.
Yep.
They just kick the can down the road to us.
Yeah, that's basically in lots of things they do.
I'm hoping the governor, I've heard some talks and he's hoping to work with the Republican side of the House and Senate. So I'm hoping maybe it won't be stalled as long as it was with Governor Wolf. So hopeful.
And unfortunately, they're not up for election this year, so there's no big push.
So a couple of things that I heard then to kind of follow up at our next Building and Grounds Finance Committee meeting. We'll continue our work on this, recognizing that there is no vote tonight on any type of tax increase. There is no definitive, it will be this. This is just discussion. This is just for us to be able to go back and keep working. I just want to clarify for everybody that's here. Got that? We're good? Okay. And I'll check in with our financial advisors and with Mrs. Hall as well to come back to what was presented by them in terms of looking at that plan from a millage piece. We'll bring that back as well as trying to gather information around how we fall in terms of millage across the county. It's not necessarily as easy to calculate, but because every district's
I thought Justin.
municipality is a little different.
Where we're at.
But we'll see what we can do to bring that back. I gave you the cost per student based on our budget final numbers that have closed. We won't know our budget per student this year until those numbers close in the next December. And we'll look at around potentially somewhere in the 3% area from a tax increase standpoint as we're working on things. Does that capture everything? Does that capture everything?
I think so.
Anything else in terms of this?
And I mean, the elephant in the room, not to beat a dead horse here, but the vote on the wit and wisdom thing is going to impact this. If that does not pass, that's going to free up $1.5 million in the budget. Now, part of that, Mr. Pomursky, you're right, will go to pay faculty planning time and things like that to recreate some elements of the curriculum, but that's a big tranche of money that's currently built into the budget. If we do not approve wit and wisdom, then that's another $1.5 million that we will have to work with. So
I would
that's-
remind you, Mr. Keener, that we're giving back federal funds then as well.
Well, no, we can remember, we can use them somewhere else.
Not necessarily.
Well, I'm confident that we will find a way to not leave those funds on the table.
You're more hopeful than I.
Not to belabor this conversation, but I think those two positions that would be in place for a year, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Dr. Dandridge, but maybe you can at some point help us out with that number, because my understanding is they are not included in this budget either. Is that accurate?
Correct. That's in our ESSER dollar.
Designations, it is not a part of this budget.
Right.
Okay.
So what you would find there is we would increase expense and increase revenue at the same threshold.
Okay.
Correct.
And I think it bears repeating, and we've been saying this ever since ESSER first came about 2 years ago. ESSER does not have to be budget enhancing. It can be budget relieving. Okay, we don't need to find ways to spend this money. There are allowable uses of ESSER funds where we can allocate existing expenses and look in our long-term financial picture. So
I would remind you that it's an opportunity for us to get back on track.
Yeah.
And that was the ultimate intent of those funds, and the utilization of those funds for educational purposes is precisely what they were allocated.
I don't disagree with that, Mr. Mallard, but we could use ESSER funds to support Mr. Graham's iPad replacement cycle. Technology is an acceptable use of ESSER dollars. Right
Maybe.
now,
We don't know that. We don't know. that.
There in ESSER 3, there are specific set asides with specific criteria that things have to be used. So there are some dollars that have to be spent on very specific things. The rest of the ESSERs and the other part of ESSER 3 did not have those specific requirements.
Yes.
So
Is it accurate to say, and this could be a question for anybody or Dr. Dandridge, is it accurate to say that if that extra dollars on those two individuals that would be ESSER funds, I understand would be technically budget neutral for that year, and they're not an ongoing cost, that amount of money, whatever that amount is, could also be applied to the program?
Correct. That's all in the 1.22 that we have to spend on learning loss.
So,
Right.
for example, if those two positions, and I'm just hypothetical, not making any assumptions, that those two positions, well, I guess I am making an assumption, those two positions are not part of that operation. That money, whatever that is, $100,000, $200,000 could go technically towards the program itself, which would maybe lower the overall expense. Is that accurate?
Well,
Or am I off base?
The amount that we have in there for the ESSER dollars, the 500,000, is a max number that we can use.
Yeah.
So that will go within the 1.22 that we have to spend. We still have additional dollars on top of that 500,000 that we need to spend towards learning loss specifically.
So it wouldn't decrease the overall cost of the program.
Correct.
in any way. That's what was worse. Okay, thank you.
Is that because the percentage of the overall cost for that grant basically that we can use?
It's because it's a 6-year contract. We can only expense funds up to September 2024 to use for the ESSER dollars. So that's the max percentage that we can take out of the dollars to use towards ESSER.
I'm sure you know what I'm going to say, but you said, Mr. Vogelmuth at the beginning, as long
Mr.
as,
Thompson, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You said at the beginning of this discussion, as we discussed that our educational programs, maybe I'm using the wrong noun, should not be affected by whatever we're doing. We have to still, and these are my words, we still have to provide what our students and teachers need in order to continue to improve instruction, quality of the workplace, quality of what our kids are learning, et cetera. I just think belaboring the 1.5 million on new curriculum for ELA, which covers a lot of subjects, I think it's worth it. And I think we heard that tonight from the teachers and what was presented. So in my mind, that's a non-negotiable. 4 or 5 million in reserve, or I know we look every year and that our administration looks very hard at where we replace retired teachers or teachers who resign according to the needs of our students and the population estimates that come in. I would just keep looking for dollars somewhere else rather than giving up a new ELA program, because without exception, the teachers seem to say, we need something new. We need something different from what we're doing. And that's what Mr. Hoffman provided for us through the 2 choices, with the support, with the input of your teaching staff. So that's my input on all this. I don't want to see any programs cut. I mean, let me rephrase that. I don't want to see the curriculum not purchased. Some programs, of course, we always need to look at programs and activities, et cetera. But to me, that is a non-negotiable. We have to take care of that. Find the money somewhere else. Or have more taxes. I'm okay with that too. And I'm retired, so.
I think there's a way to find some additional dollars. I do think there is a need for consistency. And when I thought about this at first, that $1.5 million price tag sounded daunting. As I broke it down and understand it, that's basically what, over $200,000 a year, give or take a little bit. And when you start to break it down like that, it starts to feel a little more tolerable to put something in place. Now, I'm not projecting anything. I just, I had to consider some of that. And I think the consistency is the piece that concerns me the most about some redundancy or lack of consistency, grade over grade. And there is some merit to cleaning that up.
And I would remind, when I first came on the board like 5 years ago, that was one of the goals, because we had children coming from the elementary school into the middle schools at such different levels of knowledge and experiences. And teachers could say, that kid went to Farmdale, that kid went to Centerville.
Yeah.
We don't want that. We want our kids to all look like they got the same thing in the elementary schools, and they come to the middle schools equally prepared based on what their needs were. And these programs supply that, take care of that.
Mrs. Johnson, I agree with that. The problem is it doesn't work, and we saw that in the data. If this program worked, I wouldn't be here talking about it. The administration said, we want to run a pilot to see if it works. We said, that's a great idea. So they ran a pilot, and the data makes clear that there is no consistent measurable difference in this program. It's $1.5 million for something that, by the administration's own admission, does not yield measurable results. That's my problem with it. Not any of the things that you just said.
With the qualifier of 3 months worth of data, 3 months worth of data as opposed to 6 years worth of data.
No, with all due respect to the administration, they said, let us run the pilot, the data we'll make decisions based on the data. Well, here we are. And we're not voting on it tonight. We can have this debate later, but well,
I think it is hard to get accurate data in that short amount of time. I do think that you have to look at programs that have been placed for a period of time. Because it unfortunately or fortunately, if that was promised to us, I don't know how that was a realistic promise to get accurate data with a pilot. You're just not going to see the changes in that period of time. What you see is the changes in the scores long term. And so again, just like the financial piece, it's a long-term investment and you have to look at it that way. And as much as it hurts me to think about spending those dollars, everyone knows how fiscally conservative I can be. And I also am not afraid to spend the money for the long-term gain, similar to the capital reserve money that needs to be put away. I do think there's other opportunities to save some dollars in other areas. Whether we see the results of that after 6 years or not, I think is yet to be determined. I would hope we've done our due diligence with programs that have been placed for 3 to 5 years and really truly looked at those results. And that's where I'm counting on you, Dr. Dandridge, and the team to have done that work, because I will be terribly disappointed if we make an investment in this. And at the end of the day, we're no better than state average. It's going to hurt my heart.
As will I. And that's never been our expectation here at Enfield.
One other point to consider, Grant, on this. Where else have you seen kids engaged to the point where they're saying, this is fun, and no, I want to stay and continue to finish my work before going to do something else? The only other thing I can think of is granting longer recess.
no, I
So-
appreciate the faculty
Ice cream,
presentation.
good work.
And they both are clearly exceptional
Yes.
teachers. That's why those students are excited, because they're good teachers.
Right.
And if those faculty curated material, which I know that they could do, they could curate exceptional content for those students. And that would get the students every bit as excited as they are right now. I trust that the faculty can curate materials that are going to keep our students excited about learning.
I do have a lot more to say, but it's almost 20 minutes after 10. So we can save that for another time. The curriculum.
I don't. Done with budget now?
Yeah, that's all I have from a budget standpoint.
I feel like I have to answer this. I don't want our teachers spending all their time. I want our teachers teaching the kids and not finding materials and things. Yes, that's part of their job. And they're going to still have to do that with wit and wisdom, just like they do with the math series. And I was one of the people that said to the administration, show the results. But if you remember last year, when we did the math series, yes, the one we did select had a slight difference. And I believe in Mr. Huffman, to give him credit, said basically, we're recommending this because right now we can't get the materials for the current math things we were using, and it happened to be a little bit better. So, you know, we got a math series basically with little to no significant improvement over what the kids were doing with it. Their role is to teach kids and things and not spend hours creating materials. And when they say, I can even tell you, because again, I was a 5th grade teacher. It's not even just they come to the middle school from this building or that building. You could tell sometimes as a 5th grade teacher what teachers they have in 4th grade, because it's not as consistent going across the board. And if this helps with consistency, I'm all for it. And I think our teachers deserve that.
We ready to move on?
That concludes the superintendent's report.
And now on to the president's report. I got about a 1-hour dialogue.
Would you like me to read my?
We'll leave a small break first.
Minute break.
Okay, you do yours.
I just happened to forget that paperwork tonight, so we don't have a president's report. Moving on to, I can't read this. Representative and adjunct reports, Lancaster County Career Technology, Mr. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. Bard. The JOC met on. I'm sorry. The JOC last met on March 23rd, sort of a straightforward meeting. I'm not going to belabor the agenda. And the next meeting is on April 27th.
Thank you, Mr. Keener. Any, moving on to IU13, Mr. Maris.
Nothing new to report. We have our monthly meeting tomorrow evening, which I will be attending.
Thank you, Mr. Maris. Moving on to Hempfield Area Recreational Commission, Mrs. Johnson.
Nothing new to report.
Thank you. Safety and Security, Mr. Garber.
Real quick, Bill Gleason held a safety security training session, which was a Secret Service agent and a psychologist. And they did some talks, so they did a presentation to multiple jurisdictions and schools. One of the highlights I believe is what they were saying, and we're on track with the theory of how we're doing business. So that was good to hear for that. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garber. OSBA Liaison, Mr. Rutherford.
I have nothing new to report. Mr. Bromerski, did you have anything to add?
The only piece that they're pushing is trying to continue to connect with legislatures, whether it's through PSBA's Advocacy Day or just in general. And that's just not only for us, but for our community at large. It's, as we've shared, it's important to have those conversations.
And this meeting with Senator Almond is this Thursday. And I can't attend it. I'm not sure, but if any board members are going, would someone please, for me, ask the question about the 2-year bill and ask him the 2-year budget cycle for school districts, where it stands, and put him on the spot and ask him what he believes in. You're very good at that, Mr. Keener, so you should be able to get some.
What, going to breakfast or putting people on the spot?
Both.
Both.
I've known you long enough.
I'm curious, who all is planning on going? But I think it would be great to have a large contingent there.
I think I'm on.
It's this coming Thursday.
Well, I just don't have my calendar with me.
Pardon me?
I don't have my calendar with me.
Okay. I think it starts at 8:30.
Mm.
It does. At the evening.
Okay.
Standing committees, those and grounds on March 28th, Mr. Maris.
Yeah, just a couple things. Mrs. James presented the results of the EMF testing conducted on March 10th. Results were below the acceptable FCC standard. She also presented lead water testing results. Testing was completed district-wide from February 28th through March 9th of this year, with 10 test locations at the high school and 4 at all other buildings. Results remain well below the standards. She noted that while this lead testing is not mandated by the state, at this point, it is thought that it will become mandatory in the future. That's all I have.
Any questions for Mr. Maris? Thank you, Mr. Maris. Moving on to finance, Mr. Mauer.
I have nothing new. The minutes were approved this evening from our meeting on March 28th. Our next meeting is April 25th.
Thank you. Any questions? Moving on to education and programs, Mrs. Johnson.
The minutes were approved. I'll just highlight the career readiness plan. Let me find. One of the focuses was the new graduation pathways, and we will be receiving more information about those at future education meetings. ELA, I think we talked all about that and everything we already covered. Then we have the Chat GPT, which is AI, right? Okay, and it is accessible to our students on the internet. Mr. Paul reviewed how the technology can be used, how Hempfield is evaluating it and used productively. Updates will be needed to be made to the syllabi, and grading and reporting guidelines to address plagiarism. And then also there will be educating teacher education on this technology as well, particularly about how to recognize plagiarism and also how to use it productively. So I wish them well with that. Any other questions that you might have, or go on line, the minutes, which are pretty detailed, are there. Our next meeting is the 20th of April at 5 p.m.
Any additional questions? Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Moving on to policy, personnel, and legal, Mr. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. Bard. We approved the agenda earlier and I have nothing to add beyond what was on that agenda. Well, I'm
Terrific.
sorry, the minutes. We approved the minutes earlier.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Keener. Personnel action items. Motion to approve items 9B 1 through 7.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Donato. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. All in favor? Now our motion passes 8-0. Financial action items. Motion to approve financial action items 10B through 10H as presented.
Motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mauer.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Donato. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion passes 8-0. Buildings and grounds action items. There are none. Other action items, motion to approve other action items 12B through 12G as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Keener.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Mauer. Mr. Donato. I
Yeah, that was-
apologize.
That's okay.
I was about
You
to
like
ask.
Mr. Bauer to say second?
No.
That's.
Mr. Donato, thank you. All in favor? Motion carries 8-0. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Maris.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. All in favor? 8-0. Good evening.